Hey guys, tonight we're doing something bold, maybe even reckless. You're going to fall asleep to the entire life of Catherine the Great. Not a summary, not a highlight reel, the full, tangled, opulent, glitter-dusted epic. That means court gossip, philosophical letters, political sabotage, slow-burning rebellions, fake villages, powdered wigs, torrid romances, and the kind of empire building that makes Game of Thrones look underfunded. You probably won't survive this. Not all the way through. But that's the point, right? Let the history carry you off like a carriage ride through snow-dusted St. Petersburg. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I want to know, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it? Drop your city and hour in the comments. I'll be reading them as I drink entirely too much tea and Google palace blueprints from 1760s Russia. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, imagine you're born in a tiny principality nobody cares about, to a father who never wanted a daughter and a mother who kind of wished you came out wealthier. You're plain, you're Protestant, and your full name is Sophie Friederich Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst Dornberg, which tells you everything you need to know about how powerful your family isn't. But you're clever. You know how to flatter, how to smile at the right time, how to seem invisible and yet always noticed. You're also 13. That's when it starts. A letter, a whisper, an invitation. Empress Elizabeth of Russia. Yes, the actual empress, with the gowns and the powdered wigs and the icy stare that could chill vodka, is looking for a bride for her nephew and heir, Grand Duke Peter. He's also from Germany-ish lands, and he's, well, let's call him not the most well-adjusted young man in the imperial family. You'll meet him soon. But first the Empress looks at your bloodline, squints and thinks, close enough. She invites your family to Russia. You don't speak Russian. Your lungs can't handle the icy winter. You're not even Eastern Orthodox. But none of that matters, because your mother smells a crown and drags you halfway across the continent like you're auditioning for some 18th century episode of The Bachelor Romanov edition. And to be fair, you do everything right. You smile through the cold. You survive an illness that nearly kills you. You convert religions without blinking. You learn Russian in a matter of months. You write letters to your father saying you're miserable, and to your friends saying you'll do whatever it takes. In return, they give you a new name, Yekaterina Alexeyevna. Or, as history will know you, Catherine. Now let's talk fringe facts. When you arrived in Russia at just 14 years old, you slept in a freezing, drafty room and walked the palace floors for hours at night just to keep warm and keep your blood circulating. Servants reportedly thought you were mad, but really you were terrified and determined, a girl too smart for the role she'd been given. Your fiancé, Peter? He's 16 and obsessed with toy soldiers, not metaphorically, literally. He plays with wooden figurines on his bedroom floor while you try to navigate a cutthroat court run by women in lace and men in powdered silence. Peter thinks you're beneath him. He's also deeply insecure, emotionally stunted, and possibly suffering from a head injury sustained during childhood. We'll never know for sure, but let's just say, no one thought he was fit to rule except, unfortunately, Empress Elizabeth. Catherine's early years at court are a tightrope walk across frozen marble. The Empress wants obedience, the courtiers want you to fail, and Peter, well, Peter seems to prefer dressing in Prussian uniforms and insulting Russians, which goes over really well in 18th century Russia. You, meanwhile, read everything. Philosophy, French novels, political treatises. You absorb Enlightenment ideas like a sponge dipped in revolution, and you wait, for years. There's a moment, barely a blip in the historical record but significant, that tells us everything about young Catherine. She falls seriously ill. Fever, weakness, possibly pneumonia. The doctors basically give up. Her mother prepares for death. But Catherine, ever dramatic in the best way, writes in her memoirs that she simply decided not to die. She refused. She willed herself well. You can debate the medical science, but not the mindset. That is who you're falling asleep with tonight. Now, let's talk scholarly drama. Some historians argue Catherine's early life wasn't as miserable as she later claimed, that she embellished, that she mythologized her suffering to make her rise seem more heroic. There's no shortage of memoir editing in royal circles. But others push back, pointing out her isolation, The rigid expectations, the constant scrutiny, and the emotional icebox that was Peter. They say if anything she softened the truth. Either way, one thing is clear. Catherine the Great was not born great. She wasn't even born Russian. She made herself through a sheer, relentless cocktail of charm, intellect, and an unshakable refusal to be small. She learned how to play the game, even as the pieces on the board kept changing shape. By the time Empress Elizabeth finally allows the marriage to happen, after years of grooming and public ceremonies and rumours and more than a few awkward dinners, Catherine has already quietly transformed into someone formidable. Not flashy, not loud, but calculated. A human chess piece with a soft smile and steel behind the eyes. The wedding takes place in 1745 and Catherine is 17. She's a princess, a bride, a future empress, but also still just a teenager in a foreign land, married, to a man she can't trust, in a court that may poison her breakfast if she says the wrong thing at dinner. And you, reader, you're already in too deep. Don't even try to back out now. You'd think marrying into royalty would mean instant power, luxury, and someone peeling your grapes while an orchestra plays softly in the background. Nope. Welcome to the Russian court, where being married to the heir apparent doesn't mean you're safe, respected, or even vaguely comfortable. Especially not when your new husband, Peter, treats you more like a political inconvenience than a partner. He's obsessed with Frederick the Great of Prussia, adores all things German, uniforms, marches, militaristic toys, and has a disturbingly deep connection with his toy soldiers, like he holds mock trials for them, executes them for desertion, gives them full funerals, and you're supposed to... what? Applaud? You, Catherine, try to smile. You always do. You quickly learn your role is ornamental at best and disposable at worst. Empress Elizabeth, who orchestrated the whole marriage, keeps you under suffocating surveillance. You're not allowed to speak freely, your letters are read, you're not trusted. No one's entirely convinced you're loyal to Russia, and honestly they're not wrong, not yet. You're German, remember? Still new to orthodoxy, still mastering the language, still whispering French in the corridors with anyone who will listen. And your marriage? An emotional wasteland. For 8 years, Peter and you barely function as a couple. He insults you openly, mocks you in front of servants, and, according to Catherine's own account, refuses to consummate the marriage for the longest time. There are stories of him bringing lovers into the palace, and maybe you do too, eventually. But not yet. Not when everything is still teetering on the edge of disaster. You're still playing the long game, but here's the catch. Elizabeth wants an heir. Badly. She's running the empire and she needs to secure the Romanov line. Your one job, your only real job, is to produce a son. This becomes a national crisis when it doesn't happen. People whisper, Catherine is barren, Catherine is cursed, Catherine is disloyal. No one dares say Peter might be the problem, even though he's still obsessively playing soldier with his life-size dolls and might not even understand how human reproduction works. Eventually, though, miraculously, perhaps suspiciously, Catherine becomes pregnant. In 1754, she gives birth to a son, Paul. Empress Elizabeth sweeps in like a tornado of lace and brocade and takes the baby away immediately. You barely get to hold him. Elizabeth claims him as her own, determined to raise the future heir in her image. You're a vessel again, a foreigner, a means to an end. Now here's a weird little fringe fact that gets debated endlessly. Was Paul even Peter's child? A lot of people back then didn't think so. Catherine had been getting very cosy with a certain courtier named Sergei Saltykov. Tall, dashing, probably better company than her moody husband and his toy battalion. Did Catherine take matters into her own hands to ensure there would be an heir? Maybe. Did Elizabeth know? Probably. Did anyone care as long as the baby looked Romanov enough? Honestly, no. This is where Catherine's real education begins. Not in books, though she still devours them, but in how to survive a court built on paranoia, flattery, and sudden disappearances. You learn when to speak and when to shut up, when to smile and when to disappear into the gardens. You learn to blend in while quietly becoming indispensable. You collect allies, one glance at a time. Officers, noblewomen, the clergy, servants. You become a ghost with a crown-shaped shadow. Peter, meanwhile, becomes more erratic. The older he gets, the more people whisper that he's unfit to rule. He talks openly about withdrawing from Russian alliances, He insults his advisors. He threatens to undo everything Elizabeth built. He alienates the military, the clergy, and pretty much every aristocrat who matters. And you? You nod politely. You take mental notes. You play the long game, the slow-burn chess match of imperial survival. You also start writing. Catherine's correspondence during these years is incredible. She reads Montesquieu and Voltaire, and she begins penning little essays and treatises about governance, education, and human rights. It's not just a hobby, it's part of the brand she's crafting. Not just future empress, but enlightened empress. A monarch who thinks, a ruler with taste. If she ever gets the chance, she won't just hold power, she'll deserve it. Now let's dip into some scholarly drama. Historians still argue about Catherine's strategy here. Was she always planning to take the throne? Did she see herself as a reformer from the start? Or did the chaos of Peter's behaviour slowly push her toward ambition? Some say she was a pragmatist, responding to opportunities. Others say she was a visionary, laying groundwork from the moment she arrived. There's evidence for both, and Catherine never tells the full truth in her memoirs. She's always curating her legend. Meanwhile, court life is an exhausting masquerade. Balls, ceremonies, inspections, all while the political scaffolding behind it creaks under the weight of real tension. Peter is still the heir, and Elizabeth is ageing. When the Empress finally dies in 1762, everything shifts. Just like that, Peter is emperor. He becomes Peter III, and within weeks he's unravelling decades of Russian diplomacy and enraging the nobility by praising Prussia, cancelling military victories, and insulting the Orthodox Church. You, Catherine, are now Empress Consort. But again, don't let the title fool you. You're still walking a tightrope, only now the net is gone. Peter has power, and he's erratic enough to use it against you. He jokes about locking you away. He whispers about divorce. You start to hear the word accident in conversations that involve your name. But you've been preparing for this for over a decade. In the background, a quiet alliance forms. Officers in the Imperial Guard, court insiders, even Peter's own mistress sees the writing on the wall. They don't want him on the throne. They want someone smart, someone who speaks Russian, respects the church, knows how to flatter the nobles without surrendering everything, someone who already acts like a ruler, and most importantly, someone not Peter. You don't make a move yet, but you will, soon. Because when the crown wobbles, you don't lunge. You wait, you watch, and then, when the empire holds its breath, you act. The crown is balanced on a knife edge, and you're standing very still, Catherine. Peter is emperor now, technically, but no one respects him. Not the military, not the church, not even his own advisors, and certainly not you. He seems giddy, like a child handed a sabre, too enamoured with power to realise it's double-edged. He parades through the palace in Prussian uniforms, praising Frederick the Great and insulting Russia's long war efforts like a man trying to lose friends as fast as possible. His first act is to pull out of the 7 Years' War, an unpopular move that leaves Russia's allies confused and his own generals seething. You've been waiting quietly for something to snap, and now it's close. Whispers curl like smoke around the Winter Palace. Rumours of a coup, of noble families meeting in candlelit libraries, of guards whose loyalty might be bought with the right promise, the right flattery, the right gold. You watch Peter unravel with the precision of someone who already sees the endgame. He's distracted, preening, unaware that his empress, his foreign-born, overly clever, dangerously observant wife, is about to make history. But even now, you don't rush. You've learned patience the hard way. Years of silence, of being dismissed, of surviving a loveless marriage, and public humiliation have taught you to play the long con. Still, the moment arrives faster than expected. It's July 1762. Peter's been on the throne for only 6 months, and in those 6 months, he's managed to alienate nearly every power bloc in Russia. He's preparing to leave for his summer palace when the coup sparks, not with a bang, but with a quiet oath. Soldiers of the Izmailovsky regiment swear allegiance to you in the early hours of the morning. Then another regiment joins, then another. The plan wasn't supposed to go off yet, but there it is. Momentum. And once it begins, there's no slowing it. You ride out in a carriage, dressed not in silks, but in a simple military coat. Your hair pinned back, your face calm. At the gates of the barracks you step down, mount a horse, and speak. Your voice, low and firm, echoes across the square. You're not just Catherine now. You are mother of the nation. You say you will protect Russia, the church, the people. You do not scream. You do not beg. You command, and the soldiers cheer. The image is legendary, whether it happened exactly this way or not. The future empress in uniform, riding through St. Petersburg, accepting the vows of loyalty from regiment after regiment. You march to the cathedral and are proclaimed ruler by the archbishop himself. By the end of the day, the entire capital belongs to you. Peter is away at his palace, drinking and oblivious. He barely resists when the guard shows up. He signs his abdication like it's a resignation letter from a job he never wanted, and days later, he's dead. Officially of hemorrhoidal colic, which is just fancy historical code for no one's asking too many questions. Now let's pause. Here comes the scholarly debate. Did Catherine order Peter's death? Was she even informed? Some say his death was carried out by overzealous supporters, like the Orlov brothers, who feared he might try to reclaim the throne. Others suggest Catherine knew but stayed silent to maintain plausible deniability. Her memoirs, unsurprisingly, are quiet on the matter. What's clear is that his death removes the last obstacle between you and undisputed rule, and you don't weep. Russia now belongs to you, but don't get comfortable. You're still a usurper, foreign-born, technically not in the Romanov bloodline. You've taken power through a coup, not inheritance. And your 8-year-old son, Paul, is right there, a legal heir, a constant reminder that some people don't think the throne belongs to you at all. Your position is real, but fragile, like a frozen lake in spring. But here's where Catherine really becomes Catherine. You don't waste a second. You immediately begin rebranding yourself, not just as Empress, but as the Empress Russia never knew it needed. You don't just throw balls, you throw philosophical salons. You don't just dress well, you dress politically. Russian furs, orthodox icons, national colours. You call the church your ally, even while quietly seizing lands from it to fund state reforms. You keep the army close, promote loyal officers, and reward the nobles who backed you with titles, lands, and quiet nods of gratitude. And you write. Oh, do you write? Within weeks you're corresponding with Voltaire. Yes, that Voltaire, the Enlightenment superstar. You flatter him, joke with him, charm him into becoming your unofficial PR manager in Europe. You position yourself as a monarch of reason, law, and light, a philosopher on a throne, and the world buys it. France swoons, Germany takes notes, England peeks across the channel, intrigued. Now, here's your fringe fact of the night. Just weeks after seizing power, you organise a full coronation ceremony in Moscow, the old capital. You ride in a golden carriage pulled by 8 white horses, dressed in silver and diamonds, while the bells of over 500 churches ring in unison. It's theatrical, it's excessive, it's absolutely perfect. You know what you're doing, cementing yourself not just as a political fact, but a myth. But even as you bask in your early success, there's an undercurrent of fear. You remember how fast Peter fell, how thin loyalty really is, and so you build your empire not just with power, but with personality. You become accessible, seen. You walk among your people when needed. You issue reforms, not too many, not too fast, just enough to show you're different from the dead emperors and their cold policies. You want to be loved, but you also want to be obeyed. Your court begins to reflect your taste, intellectual, extravagant, and dangerous in all the right ways. You surround yourself with brilliant minds, dazzling artists, and handsome young men who conveniently become advisors and confidants. You make yourself the sun around which the court orbits. No one forgets who rules here, not for a second. But you also know what looms ahead. Decades of war, of reform, of betrayal, of heartbreak. You've seized the crown. Now you have to wear it without letting it crush you. And tonight, as we settle into your reign, let's admit something. You didn't just survive a toxic marriage, an emotionally abusive husband, and a political coup. You thrived. You became one of the most powerful women in history, and you're just getting started. It's one thing to seize a throne, it's another to hold on to it without being stabbed, poisoned, exiled, or politely escorted into retirement with a convenient illness. You, Catherine, now sit on the Romanov throne as an outsider who stole it out from under the legal heir, and you didn't even flinch doing it. But now comes the hard part, proving you deserve it. Not to the Enlightenment philosophers writing you breathy letters from Paris, but to the real players, the Russian nobles with armies, estates, and grudges the size of Siberia. You start in classic Catherine fashion, subtle, strategic, and just a little theatrical. Within days of your coronation, you begin to build a new image, not just as empress, but as a kind of national saviour wrapped in silk and Enlightenment wisdom. The first move is not to dominate, but to reassure. You make it clear you have no intention of upending the social order, and yet, serfdom, still very much intact. Nobles, still very much in charge of their vast estates. You can't fix everything overnight, and frankly, you're not trying to. You're here to solidify power first. Reforms can wait until your grip is unshakable. But behind the scenes, oh, you're already plotting the future. Let's talk fringe fact for a second. Right after her coronation, Catherine began working on a complete reformation of Russia's legal system. And I do mean complete. She sits down and personally writes what becomes known as the nakaz, or instruction, a sprawling political manifesto that blends Enlightenment ideas with just enough Russian conservatism to keep it from being a royal suicide note. She doesn't just cut and paste Montesquieu and Beccaria, she adapts, she translates, she Catherines it. The final document is nearly 600 articles long and dares to suggest that laws should be based on reason, not tradition, that torture should be abolished, that all citizens, not just nobles, deserve justice. That's a lot for 1760s Russia. Of course, it doesn't go over as smoothly as you might have hoped. You convene a massive legislative commission, over 500 delegates from every walk of Russian life, nobles, townspeople, Cossacks, even representatives from Siberia. They meet, they read the nakaz, they debate. It's the most ambitious democratic-ish gathering Russia's ever seen. And within a year, it collapses. Too many factions, too many interests, too many people shocked that a woman, worse, a German woman, is trying to rewire centuries of power. But you don't rage, you don't punish. You simply shelve it for now, smile politely, and continue the soft coup you've been staging ever since the hard one ended. Because while the commission may have failed, the real success was in the PR. Across Europe, you're now seen as the enlightened monarch, a philosopher queen. Voltaire writes you love letters disguised as political flattery. Diderot gushes about your mind. You're building something far more important than laws right now, a legacy. At court, you become the calm eye of a glittering hurricane. The nobles still whisper, of course, they still doubt. But you keep them close. You throw opulent balls and literary salons where the vodka flows and the politics flow even faster. You distribute favours strategically. Titles, land grants, little tax exemptions that make people smile and stay quiet. You let them feel important, useful, powerful even. All while you build a system where they need you more than you need them, and you keep lovers. Let's not pretend otherwise. You're 33 now, young, powerful, and done pretending to be anything less than sovereign in every room you enter, including the bedroom. One of your most trusted companions during this early part of your reign is Grigory Orlov, one of the brothers who helped you stage the coup. He's tall, charming, loyal, and the closest thing to a co-conspirator turned boyfriend you're willing to acknowledge publicly. There are rumours you have a child together, a boy named Alexei, raised in secret. History's still a little fuzzy on the details, but what's clear is that you don't shy away from affection, as long as it doesn't threaten your autonomy. Now, here's a question that sparks all kinds of scholarly debate. Was Catherine sincere in her Enlightenment ideals, or were they just a glamorous smokescreen for old-fashioned autocracy? Some historians argue that her reforms were mostly superficial, grand speeches with little substance, laws written but never enforced. Others push back, saying she was a reformer trapped in a system too backward and bloated to be reformed overnight. The truth, of course, is somewhere in between. You believe in reason, in law, in justice, but you also believe in surviving, and you're not about to die for philosophy. Meanwhile, outside the walls of St. Petersburg, Russia is enormous, beautiful, and barely functioning. The roads are a mess. The economy is lurching. The serfs, millions of them, are essentially enslaved. Most can't read. Many won't survive the next winter. The nobles treat their estates like personal kingdoms, and the church owns more land than the state. You know all this. You see it. And slowly, carefully, you start to chip away. You seize lands from the church and nationalise them, using the revenue to pay down debt and fund new schools. You fund printing presses. You encourage translations of foreign works, even the ones that raise eyebrows. You push for secular education, not just for nobles, but for women too. Radical, dangerous, necessary. Still, you're cautious. You know what happens to rulers who try to do too much, too fast. You saw what happened to your husband. You see the riots that simmer when grain prices spike. You see the spies in your own court reporting every word you say. So you pace yourself. You build power not with sudden strikes, but with 1,000 small, unnoticeable steps. You're not flashy, you're meticulous, and you're watching the horizon. Because as you begin to reshape the empire one decree at a time, bigger storms are coming. War, rebellion, heartbreak. But tonight is quiet. You're still the woman who rode into the barracks that July morning in a soldier's coat and stole an empire without firing a shot. And you're just getting started. The coup may have been quiet, bloodless in the public record, but power in Russia is never truly taken softly. You know this, Catherine. You've watched too many hands grasp for the sceptre and come away with a poisoned cup instead. The Winter Palace smiles for portraits, but behind every velvet curtain, there's someone sharpening ambition like a knife, and yet somehow you've made it through the first trial, seizing the throne. Now with the crown actually on your head, and not just in your daydreams, you begin the second trial, keeping it. What's astonishing is how little resistance there is. After Peter's forced abdication, the empire exhales. It's like everyone in the room suddenly realises the fool is gone, and no one's particularly eager to ask where he went. The truth, of course, is uncomfortable. Days after stepping down, Peter III dies mysteriously at a country estate, under the care, or should we say supervision, of your co-conspirators, the Orloff brothers. The official cause? Hemorrhoidal colic. Sure, and the moon is made of sturgeon caviar. Even now, centuries later, historians still argue about what really happened. Did you order the hit? Was it Grigory Orloff acting on your unspoken wishes? Was it a panicked move by overzealous guards? You'll never say. In your memoirs, you speak of Peter like an inconvenient windstorm. Blustering, messy, but ultimately harmless. It's a brilliant dodge. Because whether or not you orchestrated his death, it saved you the awkwardness of housing a dethroned emperor who might try to boomerang back into power. Still, you don't celebrate. Not publicly. You mourn. You issue all the proper notices. You wear the expected shades of black. You even send your son, Paul, into official mourning, though the boy barely knew his father. He's 9 now, bright, willful, and already shaped more by tutors than by family. You love him, but distantly, like a good Romanov, and you understand that some part of him, whether he knows it or not, may one day see you as the usurper who stole his inheritance. That thought never leaves you. But in the meantime, Russia is yours. You waste no time. You summon the Senate, deliver a carefully worded speech promising stability, continuity, and lawfulness. You praise Elizabeth. You do not mention Peter. Ever. He is buried and airbrushed from memory with the efficiency of a well-oiled autocracy. You are now Catherine II, Empress and Autocrat of all the Russias, a title with enough syllables to silence most critics, and you begin ruling with the kind of calm precision that makes the nobles shift uneasily in their chairs. You don't scream, you don't threaten, you issue orders, sign decrees, and quietly remove anyone still loyal to Peter's memory. You surround yourself with capable advisors, some brilliant, some beautiful, most both. Grigory Orlov remains your closest confidant, but you're already aware that court loyalties are as seasonal as the Neva River. Nothing here stays frozen forever. Your first moves are symbolic but deeply calculated. You lower some taxes, review old cases of injustice, pardon a few political prisoners. The people cheer. The church murmurs its approval. The nobles start to relax. Russia, they think, has entered a new era. But you? You're still in a dressing gown at 3 a.m, writing letters to philosophers, drafting new school policies, and rereading reports on grain shipments like your life depends on it. Because it does. Let's drop in a strange little fringe fact. During these early years, Catherine keeps an absurdly detailed journal of her own sleep schedule, productivity and diet. Some entries read like a cross between a monarch's day planner and a neurotic self-help manual. She records which days she felt alert, which nights she overate, how often she read Plato. It's a glimpse into the constant self-surveillance she lived under, not from the state, but from herself. Always improving, always watching, always optimizing, and yet, for all this control, there's still a lingering ghost in the palace. Peter, or rather, the idea of Peter. He's dead, yes, but Russia loves a myth. Within a year, people begin whispering that Peter didn't die, that he escaped, that he's hiding in the countryside, ready to return, and sure enough, imposters begin popping up. Pretenders claiming to be Peter III come back to reclaim his crown. It would be funny if it weren't so politically flammable. You handle it with typical Catherine flair, publicly scoffing, privately panicking, just enough to tighten security. The first pretender is arrested and executed. The second disappears before reaching the capital. The third, well, you'll deal with him later. For now, you brush the dust from your gowns and step fully into the role of ruler. Let's not pretend it's all Enlightenment salons and candlelit reforms. This is still 18th century Russia. You're dealing with a patchwork empire stitched together by conquest, coercion, and bribes. Over 40% of your population are serfs, tied to the land like medieval peasants, with no legal rights and little hope of change. And while you speak of justice and equality in your letters to Voltaire, you know that threatening the landowner's power base too soon is a great way to end up in your own shallow grave. So you walk the line, carefully. You release plans for educational reform, you fund more libraries, you even suggest, gasp, that women should be educated. But you also grant new privileges to the nobility, exempt them from certain taxes, make it clear that their power is safe, as long as they stay loyal. It's a dance. One slipper in Paris, the other in a muddy Russian village, and of course, there's the endless parade of ceremonies, coronation anniversaries, saints' days, military parades. You ride through Moscow with diamond-studded reins, wave to crowds trained to cheer, and attend court in gowns so heavy you need help standing up. But behind that glitter, you're always moving chess pieces, appointing governors, redrawing borders, reading reports, reading people. And this is where historians start to debate again. Was Catherine brilliant because she ruled with enlightened ideals, or because she understood how to appear enlightened while still being, deep down, a shrewd autocrat? Did she believe in progress? Or did she just understand how to use it as a brand? The answer, frustratingly, is both. You believe in ideas, but never more than you believe in stability. You crave reform, but not at the price of revolution. You want to lead, but never to follow. And as the snow thickens outside the palace walls and the bonfires of your rivals burn low, you take a deep breath, look over your empire stretched across 11 time zones, and think, all this, and it's only the beginning. Power in Russia isn't just about thrones and titles, it's about appearances, rituals, and the ability to make chaos look like choreography. Your enemies are still watching, Catherine, some with curiosity, some with thinly veiled hatred, and some just waiting to see if you'll trip on your own silk hem. But instead of playing defense, you do something unexpected. You act like you were always meant to be here. No flinching, no apology. You carry yourself like an empress carved straight from marble and draped in velvet, even if you're still scribbling political notes behind folding screens at midnight. Your first full year on the throne is one of careful moves and strategic silences. You begin auditing the books, and it's worse than expected. The treasury, nearly empty. The war with the Ottomans had drained resources, and Peter's short reign did nothing but alienate allies and pour money into his little military fantasies. So, you start tightening the screws, but quietly. You streamline bureaucracies, reduce some lavish court expenses, and recover state-owned lands that had been given away like party favours during the last reign. What really starts to win the people over, though, is your public image. You understand branding before the word even exists. You hold audiences with foreign ambassadors, pose for portraits that are carefully staged to evoke strength and motherliness in equal measure. You appear before the Senate not as an aloof monarch, but as a woman of reason and practicality. You make people believe, not just in you, but in the idea of you, the enlightened empress, the restorer of Russian order, the woman who stepped in when men failed. You also launch an aggressive charm offensive with Europe. Letters fly from your desk like carrier pigeons on performance-enhancing drugs. Voltaire, D'Alembert, Grimm, you write them all. You flatter, you joke, you drop hints about reform and justice, and they eat it up. Voltaire calls you the Star of the North. Diderot practically swoons over your intellect. You become a darling of Enlightenment salons without ever leaving St. Petersburg. It's a flex, and everyone knows it. Now let's toss in a quirky fact. Catherine commissioned the first Russian translation of Don Quixote during this period, not because it was politically necessary, but because she believed Russians should read literature that made them laugh and think. It was part of your broader push to elevate Russian culture, to make it European, sophisticated, and self-aware. You believed satire had a role in shaping a better nation, though, of course, the satire shouldn't ever point too close to the throne. Still, for all the candlelit intellectualism and empire-wide correspondence, the core of your power lies in how well you manage your nobility, and they are, to put it politely, a handful. Russian aristocrats are accustomed to autocrats who either pamper them into uselessness or terrify them into obedience. You offer something else, calculated generosity. You reward loyalty, promote competence, and let them feel like they matter, while also ensuring none of them forget who sits at the top of the pyramid. One of your earliest and boldest moves is to reaffirm and expand the privileges of the nobility through the Charter. To the nobility. That's right. You give them more autonomy over their lands and their serfs. It's not exactly enlightened, but it buys you loyalty, which you need. Reform isn't a straight line. It's a waltz, and you know every step. You whisper about equality in Paris, but at home, you kiss the ring of tradition just long enough to keep your head. Now here's a historical debate that still divides the academic cocktail parties. Was this Catherine bowing to necessity or betraying her ideals? Some say she never intended to liberate the serfs at all, that her Enlightenment glow was just for foreign eyes. Others argue that she was boxed in by an impossible system, an empire built on forced labour and inherited privilege, and she chose survival over idealism. You, of course, never clarify. Your writings are eloquent but slippery. You say you love liberty, but you also sign off on more surveillance. You claim the law is sacred, but you bend it when it suits the state. Still, your reforms are real, even if they're uneven. You establish new provinces to make the vast empire more governable. You create regional courts, staffed not just by nobles, but by trained officials. You reorganize the administration into something almost modern. It's dry, thankless work, but it lays the groundwork for a stronger, more centralized Russia. And all the while, you keep publishing essays, proposing school curricula, and encouraging translations of Enlightenment thinkers. Meanwhile, at court, you continue curating your image. Your appearance is deliberately unthreatening but elegant. Never gaudy, never too foreign. You joke in Russian, write in French, and carry yourself like a monarch carved out of glass and iron. You keep Grigory Orlov close, but already you feel the tension. He's brave, loyal, handsome, and becoming less useful. He's not a thinker, not a planner. He wants to play at politics, but you need more than muscle now. You need minds. And yet, the court loves a romance. So you play along, the masquerade balls continue, the fireworks displays keep dazzling foreign guests, and your palace becomes a theatre of stability. You even build new wings on your residence to house expanding art collections, libraries, and foreign curiosities. It's not just indulgence, it's propaganda. A golden mirror of Russia's future, enlightened, grand, cultured. Your hermitage is slowly beginning to grow. One more strange footnote. You begin collecting artwork obsessively, not just out of personal taste, but to raise Russia's cultural status. When entire European collections go up for sale, you snatch them up before kings and dukes can blink. While France and Britain hesitate, you buy. While others debate, you act. Paintings, sculptures, entire rooms are packed and shipped north to your icy capital. You're not just amassing wealth, You're rewriting what it means to be Russian. And in the cold halls of your palace, you walk at night, often alone, still scribbling notes, still reading dispatches, still asking the same question. How do you build an empire that lasts without becoming a tyrant? Because you know the truth. You didn't inherit this empire, you stole it. Now you have to earn it, every single day. You've been on the throne for a few years now, and while the imperial seal looks lovely on your stationery, real power is less about symbols and more about stamina. It's writing until your hands ache, attending endless council meetings, and convincing 80-year-old nobles that your decisions are their ideas. It's keeping a straight face when two of your governors propose taxing buttons, and when a bishop accuses schoolteachers of encouraging atheism by teaching algebra. You smile, you nod, and then you gently remind everyone that Russia is no longer being run by a drunk in a Prussian uniform. But behind the Polish, things are getting real. Your big Enlightenment experiment is no longer just candlelit salons and giddy letters from Voltaire. It's actual lawmaking, actual change, and it's hard. Russia is sprawling, half frozen, half starving, and more than a little suspicious of progress. You're still writing your nakaz, that sweeping legal manifesto you started back when Peter was still playing with toy soldiers. You revise it constantly, refining your vision for a just, rational and enlightened Russia. It's your baby, your statement to the world. It quotes Montesquieu and Beccaria and includes wild ideas like due process and abolishing torture. Revolutionary stuff, especially for a country that still believes in confession by thumbscrew. The Legislative Commission, that grand gathering you hoped would turn your ideas into laws, has fizzled out by now. Too many factions, too much bickering, too many nobles looking at the idea of equality under the law like it's a contagious disease. They wanted favours, not philosophy. So when it stalls, you quietly let it die, and no one misses it more than you. The nakaz becomes more of a showpiece than a roadmap, but even as it gathers dust, it serves its purpose. Europe is still swooning. They believe you're serious about reform. They want to believe it. And honestly, you still kind of want to believe it too. Still, ideas aren't enough to keep an empire upright. You need allies, and that means revisiting your favourite imperial hobby, collecting lovers who double as policy advisors. Your relationship with Grigory Orlov is starting to fade. He's brave, sure, and incredibly easy on the eyes, but you've outgrown him intellectually. You've begun to crave sharper minds, not just strong hands. Enter one of the most magnetic figures of your life, Grigory Potemkin. Let's pause for a moment. You know how in every royal drama there's that one figure who seems to step out of the mist like a character written by a better novelist? That's Potemkin. Tall, flamboyant, a little wild around the edges, with a mind that burns as hot as yours. He's a soldier and a statesman, a lover and a lunatic, and when your paths cross, it's like flint striking steel. Now, there's debate about the timeline, when exactly things between you two turned romantic, how many years you were on again, off again. But what's not in question is the effect he had on you. Potemkin gets you. Not just your ambition or your loneliness, but your vision. He doesn't just nod politely when you talk about reform. He listens, argues, challenges, and best of all, he doesn't want your throne. He wants to build something with you. Fringe fact time. There's a persistent theory, rumour, really, that you and Potemkin were secretly married. No ceremony, no public record, just a private vow exchanged in a chapel with only a handful of witnesses. It's romantic, possibly apocryphal, and totally in character for both of you. Whether or not it happened, you treat each other like partners in both statecraft and mischief. Under Potemkin's influence, you double down on reforms. You expand provincial governments, push for better communication between the capital and the far corners of the empire, and start establishing state-run schools. Education becomes a quiet obsession of yours. You believe that a nation can't rise if its people are too ignorant to read their own laws. It's radical thinking in a land where many peasants still can't sign their names, and where some noblemen think Latin grammar is a French insult. But the Enlightenment glow can't hide everything. Not when half your population still lives in conditions worse than your horses. The serfs, millions of them, are still trapped in a feudal system that makes slavery look like a cousin twice removed. You know it's unjust. You admit it in private. But every time you consider changing it, the same dilemma rears up. Do you reform the system and risk civil war, or keep the peace and let injustice linger. So, you compromise. You try to make small changes, limit how harshly landowners can punish their serfs, regulate court procedures, prevent mass abuses, but these are bandages on a broken spine. The landowning class, emboldened by your earlier gifts of power, push back against every whisper of reform. They remind you that your crown depends on their support, and they're right. Meanwhile, the deeper you move into governance, the more the edges of the Enlightenment start to blur. You still write to Voltaire, still flatter Diderot, but you're becoming increasingly aware that theory alone won't fix what's broken. Russia is too big, too raw, too ancient in its bones. It needs structure, not slogans. So you start building that structure, one brick at a time. Let's turn now to one of your quieter victories, the expansion of the Russian press. You allow more printing houses, more publications, more translations of foreign works. You don't go full freedom of the press, let's not get crazy, but you do lift some censorship laws and let ideas flow a little freer. You want Russians to read, to think, to feel something other than cold and hunger. There are limits, of course. Any pamphlet that gets too critical of the monarchy finds its author on a quick vacation to Siberia. Enlightenment, yes, but with caveats. At court, you remain the centre of gravity. You host readings, concerts, debates. Your palace becomes a reflection of your mind, lavish, curious, and impossible to fully map. One night you might be reading Cicero. The next you're arguing with a French ambassador over the finer points of Rousseau's social contract, always working, always watching. Even your lovers start to feel like temporary appointments, each one carrying a blend of charm and political utility. And now, as Russia begins to settle under your rule, people finally stop using the word usurper when they speak your name. They start using words like builder, ruler, empress. But even as you gaze out over your empire, there's something rising at its edges. Whispers of unrest, a storm of a different kind, one that won't be charmed by Enlightenment pamphlets or silken ball gowns. For now, though, you rest. You're in love, you're in power, and you've survived what would have crushed lesser monarchs. Still, in the back of your mind, a voice whispers, the harder you build it, the louder it falls. The Winter Palace gleams under a skin of frost and gold, but you know better than to trust polished surfaces. Beneath the chandeliers and crushed velvet, the empire still groans like an old wooden ship. You've layered on Enlightenment charm, imported books, carved out new provinces, and rewritten just enough laws to impress your pen pals in Paris. But Russia is not Versailles. It's colder, hungrier, and packed with people who've never seen your fancy reforms because they're too busy trying not to freeze to death. Still, you persist. You're not just building an image, you're building permanence, power that lasts, power that isn't questioned every time the wind changes direction, and nothing reinforces legitimacy like architecture. You know that to rule Russia, you have to be seen ruling Russia. So you begin a grand campaign, not just of governance, but of visibility. Palaces are refurbished, new ones are built. The Hermitage expands with alarming speed. You collect art like a dragon collects gold, not just to show off, but to make a point. Russia is not some backward outpost anymore. Under your reign, it will rival Paris, Vienna, Rome. You commission works from European masters, then display them like trophies. The people won't see them, of course, but the people who matter will. Ambassadors, nobles, visiting royalty. Anyone who steps into your marble halls must walk away thinking, this is not a woman to underestimate. You also start playing the long game of imperial branding. Portraits are commissioned with deliberate symbols, books, sceptres, law codes. You instruct painters to depict you not just as a queen of beauty, but as a woman of wisdom. You aren't the blushing virgin monarch or the tragic widow. You're the mother of the nation, even if you've barely spoken to your son in months. In one famous portrait, you're shown in Roman garb, draped in velvet, gazing off into a future only you can see. It's propaganda wrapped in oil paint, and it works. But image alone won't hold the empire. You begin tightening the machinery of government. More civil servants are trained, provincial governors are rotated more frequently to cut down on corruption, and you insist on receiving regular reports, reams of them, from across the empire. You don't always have time to read them, but you want them, because information is power, and more importantly, the fear that you're reading them keeps your officials in line. You rule with presence, even when you're not in the room. Now, let's talk about a strange little detail that gets skipped in most textbooks, the mail system. That's right. In the 1760s and 70s, you overhaul Russia's postal routes, not because you're obsessed with logistics, although maybe a little, but because communication across an empire this vast is a matter of life and death. You need to know what's happening in Crimea before it turns into a crisis. You need to get orders to Kazan before the river freezes, so you streamline the system, add new way stations, and drastically cut delivery times. The result? A better connected Russia, and a ruler who knows what's happening before the problems reach her doorstep. And then there's your favourite pet project, education. You push for a national school system, not just for noble sons, but for girls as well. Shocking, revolutionary, dangerous. You want women to read, to think, to contribute to the world beyond embroidery and childbirth. You write entire essays on the subject, pen directives for teachers, and oversee the creation of the Smolny Institute, the first state-funded school for girls in Russia. It's a direct challenge to centuries of patriarchal rot, and of course, it gets pushback. But you don't flinch. You believe deeply that an educated woman is not a threat to the state, but the foundation of a better one. Now, let's stir in some scholarly controversy for flavour. Was Catherine genuinely passionate about female education, or was this just another Enlightenment performance? Critics argue that most girls' schools during your reign were still limited, focused more on manners and music than philosophy or science. But defenders say you pushed the line as far as you could without risking full-scale backlash, and you did far more than any ruler before you. In your eyes, intelligence wasn't a male trait. It was a human one. That alone was radical. But not everyone's clapping for you. In the provinces, the serfs haven't seen any real change. Their lives are still defined by hunger, taxes, and landlords who treat them like livestock. The nobility, empowered by your early concessions, double down on exploitation. Grain shortages turn into famines. Local courts are clogged with complaints from peasants, most of which go ignored. You wanted to build an empire of law, but laws you're learning mean nothing without teeth. Meanwhile, whispers spread. You hear them at court in half-finished jokes and half-empty glasses of wine. She's a foreigner. She reads too much. She's not Romanov blood. It doesn't matter that you've ruled for a decade or that you've brought stability and reform. You'll never stop being the woman who took a throne that wasn't hers. Every ball you throw, every garden you build, every school you open, it's all weighed against that one sin. You seized power, and you were good at it. Fringe fact for you. Catherine was known to carry a small golden snuff box decorated with an image of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. She would sometimes place it deliberately on the table during meetings, a quiet signal that while the men talked, she thought. It wasn't subtle, but then again, subtlety only gets you so far in a room full of generals. And what about Paul? Your son, now a teenager, is developing opinions, dangerous ones. He resents you. He resents that you rule while he waits. He resents that you rarely let him speak in court or appear beside you at state functions. He calls you cold. Some days you are. You love him, somewhere beneath the layers of politics and strategy, but you don't trust him. He's impulsive. He idealizes his dead father, or rather some fantasy version of Peter III that never really existed. And you know the truth. If you were to die tomorrow, Paul would undo everything. He would take your careful reforms and light them on fire out of spite and boredom. So you keep him close, but not too close. Instead, you throw yourself into the only thing that's never betrayed you. Work. You rise early, you read constantly, you write laws with the kind of focus usually reserved for monks and madmen. You are, by every measurable standard, one of the most involved monarchs in Europe. You don't just sign documents, you edit them. You cross out weak verbs and scribble in the margins. No decision is too small. No detail escapes your gaze. And yet, you know something's coming. You can feel it. The wind shifts. The letters grow darker. Reports come in from the south. Unrest, rumours, fires. You squint at the names on the page. A former soldier. A Cossack. A man claiming to be Peter III. You blink. No, It couldn't be. But then again, Russia loves a ghost. You've seen a lot from your marble throne, but nothing quite like this. The reports come in slowly at first. Tiny sparks in the south. Farmsteads ransacked. A provincial noble's house torched. A clerk whipped for trying to enforce a tax. Normal, in a grim, empire-sized way. Russia's always grumbling. But then, the name shows up. That cursed, ridiculous name that refuses to die. Peter III. Again. Supposedly alive. And marching with a band of followers who are convinced, or pretending to be convinced, that the emperor you deposed is alive and very much ready to reclaim his crown, which for the record is absolutely not true. He's still extremely dead. But truth rarely survives a good story. This time, though, the story doesn't stay local. It spreads like frost across the steppe. And leading the charge? A former Cossack officer named Emelian Pugachev, a wiry man with a long beard, a raspy voice, and the gall to declare himself your dead husband reborn. Not reincarnated, not spiritually guided, just literally alive. He claims you faked Peter's death, that he escaped, fled south, grew a beard, and is now returning to free the people from your German tyranny. It's absurd, it's offensive, and it's effective. Because the people, especially the peasants and Cossacks, want to believe. They've had enough. Enough of hunger, of corrupt local lords, of backbreaking taxes and beatings handed out like morning bread. Pugachev promises something else. Land, justice, revenge. He speaks their language, literally and emotionally. He tells them what they want to hear, that Catherine the Great is a foreign impostor, that the true Tsar has returned, and that the world is about to be flipped upside down. And for the first time, you, Empress of all the Russias, begin to feel something you haven't felt in years. Nervous. Because this rebellion, it's not a court whisper or a pamphlet printed in someone's basement. This is full scale. The largest peasant uprising in Russian history. And it's not just peasants. Former soldiers join him. Cossacks, angry at lost privileges, rally to his side. Even some ethnic minorities, long abused and ignored, see Pugachev as their unlikely champion. Entire towns switch allegiance. Forts are captured. Noble estates are burned to the ground, literally. Their owners hanged, beaten, or drowned in their own cellars. The rebellion becomes a firestorm of rage and revenge. You're furious. Not just because someone dared challenge your rule, but because it's working. Your grip over the empire's southern region starts to slip. Messages are delayed. Governors panic. Pugachev begins issuing decrees as Tsar Peter III, setting up his own makeshift government. He even claims to have your son Paul in hiding, ready to reclaim the empire together. Of course, Paul is safely sulking in St. Petersburg under a battalion's worth of guards. But again, truth doesn't matter when you're angry and barefoot. Fringe fact. One of Pugachev's favourite tactics was dressing in royal clothing stolen from murdered nobles. He'd hold mock court sessions in looted mansions, wearing furs and drinking stolen champagne, giving orders with theatrical flair. The people didn't care if it was ridiculous. They'd never had this much attention, this much vengeance, this much hope, even if it was fake. So you respond the way any self-respecting empress would, with overwhelming force. You call up the army, you recall generals from the west, you give them direct orders, crush this rebellion, make examples, leave nothing to rise again, and the response is brutal. Towns are retaken in waves, rebel leaders are captured and hanged in public squares. Peasant villages suspected of harbouring rebels are burned. You do not have the luxury of softness here. You're not fighting an ideology, you're fighting chaos, and it terrifies you. Historians still debate how close Pugachev really came to threatening your regime. Some say he was never a real danger, that the army was always going to crush him. Others point to how deeply the rebellion cut through the empire's soft underbelly. That if the revolt had reached Moscow, or if a few more garrisons had defected, you might not be the Great today. One thing is certain, it's the closest you ever come to losing everything. You don't sleep well during these months. Your hair starts greying faster. You read reports until your vision blurs. You cancel concerts, stop receiving guests. Behind the doors of your gilded palace, you're steel and fire, pacing until sunrise, waiting for the rebellion to burn out. And finally, it does. In 1775, Pugachev is captured by his own men, exhausted, betrayed, sick. He's dragged in chains to Moscow, where he's paraded through the streets like a circus animal. And then, in a display meant to warn the entire empire, he is executed in Red Square. Beheaded, his corpse quartered, left on display. A message plain and unmistakable. Don't ever do this again. But the rebellion leaves a scar. You thought the Enlightenment would save Russia. That if you built schools and spread ideas and gave nobles their little titles and towns, everyone would play along. But what the Pugachev uprising proves, beyond any shadow of doubt, is that the empire you rule is still raw, angry, and just one famine away from lighting the whole map on fire. So you adapt. Your reforms change. They become quieter, less idealistic. You begin relying more heavily on the nobility again. You stop talking so much about liberty and start emphasizing order. You empower the police. You expand the Secret Service. You watch everything. You also tighten your grip on the provinces. After the rebellion, you reorganize the entire imperial administrative map. The gubernia reform of 1775 divides Russia into 50 provinces, each with its own governor and bureaucracy. You want oversight, loyalty, and, most importantly, speed. You don't want to hear about the next uprising after it's already taken 3 towns. These changes sound boring on paper, but they give you eyes and ears across a land that stretches from Poland to the Pacific. Fringe historical debate. Some scholars argue that Pugachev's rebellion marks the moment you abandon Enlightenment ideals entirely, shifting toward authoritarianism in all but name. Others say it's a necessary correction, that no ruler could continue talking about liberty in a country where most of the population doesn't even legally own their own shoes. Either way, you stop pretending that philosophy can always outpace fire, and yet you don't abandon everything. You're still Catherine, still the reader, still the builder. After the rebellion, you pour even more resources into infrastructure, public health and culture. You launch new university projects, expand the Academy of Sciences, and continue collecting art like your life depends on it, which, in some ways, it does. The more cultivated the capital looks, the more legitimate your reign seems. You also never forget how close you came to collapse. You don't show it, not in your letters, not in your public appearances, but the knowledge becomes a permanent splinter under your skin. You came to power by force, and it nearly slipped away to a man in a stolen coat and a fake name. But you survived. You always do. And now, you're even more dangerous. You've had your reality check. Pugachev handed it to you bloody and smoking, and you didn't flinch. You tightened your corset, rewrote the maps, and turned rebellion into an excuse to streamline the empire like a woman rearranging her furniture after a break-in. Less for comfort, more for control. Now, with the southern flames stamped out and your grip recalcified, you take a breath and remember who you are. Not just a ruler, not just a survivor, but a student. Always reading, always planning, always preparing for the next fire before the smoke rises. And one place you're determined to bring change, maybe real change this time, is education. Russia, for all its size and elegance at the top, is still largely illiterate from the ground up. Peasants can't read, some nobles barely can, and outside of the capital, most schools are run by clergymen with more crosses than chalkboards. You decide this isn't just inefficient, it's embarrassing. So you push forward with one of your boldest initiatives, the Statute of National Education, a state-sponsored secular education system inspired by the Enlightenment's greatest hits. You don't want just a few schools, you want an empire-wide grid of primary and secondary institutions. It's shockingly modern, and of course wildly idealistic. You call for co-ed education, briefly, then backtrack when the backlash hits like a winter gale. So you separate boys and girls, but you don't give up. You want structured curricula, uniform teaching methods, trained instructors, textbooks. It's not glamorous, but it is revolutionary, especially in a land where most children are still being taught by whoever can recite the alphabet while sober. Let's drop in a fringe detail that deserves applause. You push for geometry to be taught at the primary level, not just for its utility, but because you believe it teaches logic. And logic, in your view, is the gateway drug to reason. And reason is the only path out of the swamp Russia has been stuck in for centuries. You're not trying to turn peasants into poets, yet, but you are planting seeds. You also begin founding teacher training institutes, which at the time is so forward-thinking it actually confuses some of your ministers. You mean we teach the people who teach? They ask, like it's alchemy. Yes, you reply, that's exactly what you mean. A factory for minds. And while many of these reforms start in urban areas, your vision always stretches beyond the capital. You want the future to reach the villages, even if it takes generations to do so. But you're not just focused on dusty classrooms. You still have an empire to glamorize. And in Catherine fashion, you're doing it one palace, one painting, and one carefully staged public appearance at a time. You expand the Hermitage again, this time acquiring full art collections from bankrupt European nobles. You send envoys to Italy, France, the Netherlands, all with shopping lists that include Rembrandt, Rubens, Van Dyck. You're not hoarding, you're curating a national identity. When people walk through your galleries, you want them to see not just paintings, but a message. Russia belongs in the same breath as Europe. We're not just vodka and snow anymore. And yes, your own image gets a glow-up too. You commission statues of yourself. Not overly grand, just monumental enough to whisper immortal. One in particular stands out. A bronze colossus that shows you not in regal pose, but mid-step, as if moving forward. You love that one. It feels accurate. You've never been still. Meanwhile, Potemkin is still very much in the picture. Maybe not in your bed anymore, though who's keeping track, but certainly in your government. You've made him one of the most powerful men in Russia, and while some of your advisors grumble about nepotism, the truth is Potemkin is no idle decoration. He's a whirlwind of ideas. Infrastructure, agriculture, diplomacy, military reforms. He dives into them all like a man with 3 brains and no brakes. Together you launch a new campaign of southern expansion, toward the Black Sea, toward the fading power of the Ottoman Empire. It's not just about land, it's about prestige. Russia has long been locked in by ice and geography. A warm water port isn't just strategic, it's a symbol. You want access to the Mediterranean, you want to sail, trade, shine. And as these ambitions grow, so does Potemkin's vision for what the South could become. He starts building, not just forts and roads, but entire towns, cities, a new Russia, warm and sun-drenched, stretching toward the ancient glory of Byzantium. He's a dreamer, but he's also dangerously good at making dreams look real. Now, here comes the quirky, historical moment everyone remembers, the Potemkin villages. Legend says that during one of your grand tours of the newly acquired South, Potemkin, desperate to impress you, constructs entire fake villages, just facades, with painted windows and hired peasants waving from behind cardboard doors. He has them set up along the Dnieper River, dismantled after you pass, then rebuilt further down the route so it looks like the land is flourishing. Do we know for sure this happened? Not exactly. Some historians say the story is wildly exaggerated, possibly invented by foreign ambassadors eager to undermine your administration. Others think there's a kernel of truth, maybe not entire towns, but definitely some creative stage managing. Regardless, the phrase Potemkin village becomes shorthand for any grand illusion, which is kind of ironic, considering that under your reign, Russia's illusions are starting to become real. You don't just talk about modernization anymore, you do it. Roads are paved, trade expands, foreign investments pour in. You send Russian students abroad to learn science and medicine. You start thinking about smallpox inoculation, not for nobles, but for the general public. You even get vaccinated yourself, publicly, to set an example. A bold move, considering half the empire still believes smallpox is caused by evil spirits and bad wind. Fringe fact: after your inoculation in 1768, you ordered medals struck to commemorate the event, engraved with the words, "She set the example." Because of course you did. You understood branding better than most monarchs understand basic hygiene. But for all your success, your eyes are always scanning the horizon. You know progress in Russia is like building a clock in a swamp. Every gear resists, every turn is slowed by mud, and the storm clouds haven't vanished. They've just moved farther out. Your son Paul is now in his 20s, and your relationship with him is complicated. He's moody, erratic, obsessed with military drill and old traditions. He resents that you still haven't named him co-ruler. You resent that he keeps idolizing his dead father, that sad Prussian mannequin. You send him to travel Europe, hoping exposure will polish him. But even then, you keep him on a short leash. Because deep down, you know, the moment he's let in, the work you've done could start to unravel. So you keep building. You keep ruling. You keep writing laws, commissioning plays, expanding borders, editing reports with ink-stained fingers long after midnight. You are undeniably in charge, but the world is shifting. And soon, another storm is coming, this time from the west. Revolution is on the move. You know how this works by now. Build something too beautiful, and the world will come looking to tear it down. You've gilded your palaces, reorganized your provinces, steamrolled education reforms into the stubborn soil of the empire, and now, as your reign enters its second decade, things are finally starting to look like the Russia you dreamed of, or at least a close enough illusion to convince foreign dignitaries that the Enlightenment lives in the north. And then, as always, real life comes marching through the gold leaf doors wearing muddy boots. His name is Grigory Potemkin, and no, this isn't his first appearance, but this is where things go from strategic flirtation and shadow co-rulership to something deeper, something messier, something dangerous in all the right ways. You've had lovers before, dozens, depending on which historian you ask, but Potemkin is different. He's more than just attractive or clever. He's chaos, brilliance, loyalty, and vanity stitched together with military epaulets. He's you if you were 6 feet tall, wore medals to breakfast, and had no filter. You're not officially married to him, not publicly at least, but the rumours that you secretly tied the knot in a private Orthodox ceremony just won't die. And frankly, you don't go out of your way to kill them. It keeps people guessing. You like that. Your relationship with Potemkin becomes the great puzzle of your reign. Are you married? Are you still lovers? Are you just friends with absurd benefits, both political and personal? The answer changes depending on the week, sometimes the hour. But here's the magic. Potemkin doesn't need the throne. He doesn't resent your power. He doesn't pull, doesn't push, doesn't get offended when you edit his plans or override his decisions. He knows you, respects you, and somehow thrives under you without trying to outshine you. That's rare, precious, possibly fatal. You've seen what happens to favourites who rise too fast, but Potemkin, he rises with you. Now, let's get to the empire part of this love story, because what you two create together is nothing short of imperial theatre. You send him south to oversee your newly claimed territories along the Black Sea. It's a messy, sun-baked region, freshly carved from the carcass of the Ottoman Empire, and it needs order. Potemkin doesn't just bring order, he brings a vision. He starts building cities from scratch. Kherson, Sevastopol, Simferopol, ports, roads, shipyards, markets. He drains swamps, diverts rivers, and brings in settlers from all over Europe. You're 1,000 miles away, running the north like a seasoned general in a satin gown, but you keep in constant contact. Letters, messengers, secret codes, affectionate nicknames. You write to him about politics and weather and war and breakfast. He writes back with battle reports, architectural sketches, and the occasional poetry attempt. You love him. Maybe not always romantically, maybe not in the fairy tale sense, but in that rarest way two people can, as co-creators of something much bigger than themselves. Fringe fact: Potemkin once proposed building a canal to connect the Black Sea to the Baltic, not because it was remotely practical, but because he believed Russia should never be dependent on foreign ports. You didn't greenlight it, you weren't that in love, but you admired the audacity, the dreamer's nerve. He was like a storm in boots, and you adored him for it. Now, let's revisit the infamous Potemkin villages, because this is the part of the story where legend and reality start doing a slow dance in moonlight. In 1787, you decide to tour the southern territories, the ones Potemkin's been transforming. It's a massive production. Thousands of guards, advisors, musicians, foreign ambassadors, and even your enemies disguised as guests. The goal? To show off. To prove that Russia's south isn't just a military conquest. It's a civilized jewel in your imperial crown. And yes, during this tour, Potemkin stages things. How much? Well, that's still debated. Some say he props up fake villages, paints facades, and stations well-dressed peasants along the road to wave and cheer. Others say it's exaggerated. Propaganda from your European enemies, mostly the Austrians and French, who want to believe your empire is all show and no substance. The truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. There were real improvements, real cities, real farms, but there was also pageantry and carefully managed optics and a whole lot of Potemkin flair. But let's be clear, the southern territories did grow under your watch. Crimean ports did flourish. Russian ships did sail where Ottoman ones once ruled. And that tour? That tour worked. Even your sceptical guests admitted that something big was happening in the Russian south, something permanent, something imperial. Of course, nothing delights your enemies like mocking it. The term Potemkin village becomes shorthand for any glittery illusion meant to hide rot. It survives for centuries, but if they laughed, you didn't hear them. You were too busy writing dispatches on shipyard productivity while sipping wine on a river barge. Now let's talk about the big historical debate this section always sparks. Was Potemkin truly a genius, or just a charlatan with good timing and great taste in fur-lined cloaks? Was he building a future, or just decorating the scenery for your approval? The answer, of course, is yes, to all of it. He was a genius, and he was a showman. He exaggerated, he boasted, but he also delivered. His cities still stand, his ports still sail, and long after his beard turned grey you still trusted him with the one thing you never gave freely: responsibility. Even when your romance faded into something platonic, he remained at the centre of your political heart. You assigned him impossible tasks, he completed most of them. When he fell out of favour, he didn't sulk, he waited, and you always came back to him. In a court full of snakes and flatterers, Potemkin was your unicorn in epaulets. Fringe detail alert. Potemkin once sent you a giant wheel of cheese from the southern provinces, inscribed with your initials in poppy seeds. Romantic? No. Iconic? Absolutely. Back in the capital, you continue tightening your empire like a corset. Your ministries hum with new protocols. Your governors become less corrupt, more efficient. You commission surveys, censuses, studies. You're obsessed with data. You want to know how many cows are in Bessarabia, how many bakers in Kazan, how many chimney sweeps in every dusty, freezing outpost. This is your empire, not as a map, but as a living, breathing ledger. And through it all, Potemkin remains the shadow beside your throne. Not ruling, not demanding, just there. A reminder that empires are built not just on stone and steel, but on the strange, unspeakable bonds between people who believe in each other's madness. You are Catherine, he is Potemkin. And together, for one brief, dazzling moment, you make Russia feel inevitable. You should be savouring your triumphs by now. Most rulers would. You've expanded your empire, crushed a rebellion, steamrolled educational reform into a reluctant nobility, and turned the southern wilderness into something approaching civilization, or at least something that looks good on a map. But you're not done. You're never done. Because now, while your rivals are busy digesting your Grand Black Sea tour and trying to decipher your relationship with Potemkin, you're already deep in something new. Something ancient, actually. You're about to pick a fight with the Ottoman Empire, again. This isn't just about borders, it's about legacy. Ever since Peter the Great played battleship with Sweden, and lost a chunk of his dignity in the process, every Tsar and Tsarina after him has had one eye on the warm waters of the south. Why? Because Russia is cold, and ice doesn't make for a great navy. You need ports, you need trade, you need access to the Mediterranean so Russia can stop lurking around the edges of Europe and start being Europe. So when tensions with the Ottomans start to flare, again, you lean in, hard. It's 1787, and while your diplomats draft polite letters, your real messages arrive by cannonball. Potemkin's already in the south, organising, building, fortifying. He knows this terrain better than anyone, and while he may still be recovering from the chaos of hosting your megatour, imagine planning a royal inspection that includes hundreds of miles of travel, fake villages, actual villages, diplomats, and powdered wigs in 100-degree heat. He's ready. He always is. Let's do a quick war breakdown. The Russo-Turkish War of 1787-1792 is not your first rodeo. It's the sequel to a previous dust-up from the 1760s, and it plays like a historical remix. Same foes, same frontiers, new stakes. The Ottomans, still sore from losing Crimea, and some prime coastline to you in the last treaty, think they can catch you off guard. But they forget two important things. One, your memory is long, and two, Your navy has gotten extremely good at turning Turkish ships into floating, kindling, and now you've got allies. Or well, sort of allies. The Austrians, led by Emperor Joseph II, agree to join your side. You two have exchanged letters for years. He thinks you're the future of monarchy. You think he's a little too into military uniforms, but you both hate the Ottomans, so that's enough for now. But here's the twist. The Austrians are not great at war. They're enthusiastic, certainly, but they have a gift for miscommunication and an almost supernatural ability to turn victory into mild embarrassment. So while they bumble through the Balkans, your forces, commanded by Potemkin, Suvorov and other generals, with names sharp enough to cut glass, start making real progress. You take fortresses, you win naval battles, you prove once again that Russia is not to be underestimated. Meanwhile, you keep the home fires burning, literally. War doesn't pay for itself, so you increase taxes, mint more coins, and lean on the nobility for donations, which is imperial speak for, give me money, or I'll remember that time you insulted my boots in court. You also keep writing letters, especially to your Enlightenment friends. Diderot's gone, Voltaire is dead, and Rousseau is still being difficult even from beyond the grave. But their successors still want to believe in you, the philosopher queen, the benevolent despot, the proof that monarchy and reason can share a bed. You keep up appearances. While soldiers bleed in the south, your palace sparkles. You host operas. You commission busts of yourself in faux Roman style. You wear togas for portraits. You name your peacocks after Greek gods. At night you study maps, read dispatches, and draft new plans for post-war reorganization. Enlightenment and empire are no longer separate projects. They've merged, and you are the hinge holding them together. Fringe fact time. During the war, you ordered several volumes of ancient military history to be retranslated from Latin, just so you could personally compare your campaign strategies with those of Caesar and Alexander. You weren't being ironic. You genuinely believed Russia was your canvas and that greatness required footnotes. But let's not pretend you're delusional. You also know that war, for all its glamour in marble busts and dramatic oil paintings, is ugly up close. You get the casualty reports. You read about dysentery outbreaks in your camps, hear of famine in the border towns. You push relief efforts, send medical supplies, and order your generals to build roads as they conquer. Because conquest without infrastructure is just glorified looting. You want victory that lasts, and you get it. After 5 brutal years, the war ends with the Treaty of Jassy in 1792. Russia gains more territory, the Dniester River becomes the new border, the Ottomans sulk, Austria wanders off, a little confused about whether they won anything. But you've expanded the empire again, you've opened more southern ports, and you've made it impossible for any European power to ignore Russia's new position, not just as a military force but as a civilized one. This triggers another scholarly debate, of course. Some historians argue you were always an empire builder first, Enlightenment monarch second, that the libraries and letters were just window dressing for centuries of conquest. Others see your wars as necessary evils, part of modernizing a feudal sprawl into a coherent nation. You naturally offer no clarification. You just keep building. But war takes its toll, even on the strong. Potemkin, ever your general, ever your storm, starts to break. His health falters. His energy, once volcanic, flickers. In 1791, while travelling through his beloved southern provinces, he dies suddenly. The news hits you like ice water to the chest. You've lost commanders before. You've buried favourites, cast aside lovers, punished friends. But this is different. Potemkin wasn't just part of your story. He was the story. Fringe footnote. You had his body embalmed and buried in the Cathedral of St. Catherine in Kherson, a city he helped found, a city named for you. When they laid him to rest, some said the thunder that rolled in over the steppe that night wasn't weather. It was grief. You don't spiral. You never spiral. You host your court as usual. You sign decrees. You ride through St. Petersburg with a practiced smile. But you don't write letters for a while. Not the way you used to. Something shifts. Not dramatically. Just permanently. The war is over, the maps are redrawn, and you're more alone than you've been in years. Still, there's no time to mourn, because while you've been conquering lands and watching legends die, something has started to flicker across the continent. In Paris, of all places. The Enlightenment, your old lover, is throwing a tantrum, and heads are beginning to roll. So, let's set the stage. It's the early 1790s, and while you're basking in the afterglow of another victorious war, expanding your empire like it's a particularly challenging game of Risk, Europe begins to shift under your feet. Something strange is happening in France. At first it's just noise, pamphlets, protests, a few uncomfortable letters from people who used to write with powdered grace, but now seem nervous. You get wind of murmurs about liberty, about bread, about a queen with a thing for Austrian fashion and zero instinct for self-preservation. Then the Bastille falls, and the revolution truly begins. At first you don't panic. France has always been dramatic, but then heads start coming off. Real heads. Royal ones. Marie Antoinette, your distant cousin-in-law maybe, depending on how you twist the Romanov-Habsburg family tree, goes from Versailles to the guillotine, and suddenly all of Europe is holding its breath. This isn't a palace coup. This is a social earthquake. And you, Catherine, with your Enlightenment letters, your Voltaire, quotes, your imported European court dances, begin to feel a chill run through all that candlelight. Because while you were borrowing Enlightenment ideas to prop up your rule, France was weaponizing them. This is the part of your reign where the mood begins to shift. You're not suddenly anti-progress, but you start to realize something important. Ideas, once released, don't go back in the bottle. You wrote about equality, you flirted with freedom of speech, you built schools and printed essays, but you never actually meant for people to question you. That was never part of the deal. And now, thousands of miles away, a bunch of upstart Frenchmen are proving that Enlightenment ideals taken to their logical extreme end not in polished reforms, but in revolutionary tribunals. So you pivot. Quietly at first, then more obviously. You cut off correspondence with France. You ban the translation and circulation of radical French newspapers. You close certain salons that start quoting Rousseau a little too much. You still believe in progress, of course, but now it has to be supervised, tamed, castrated if necessary. Your new philosophy is best described as Enlightenment with a leash. Let's slip in a fringe detail. In private, you continue to read everything, even the French revolutionaries, even the radical thinkers who now call monarchy a blood-soaked relic. You don't agree, obviously, but you don't look away either. You want to understand them. Control begins with knowledge, always has. You make notes in the margins. Dangerous. Naive. Potentially useful if reworded. Even now, you're thinking like a strategist, not a censor. Back in Russia, your pivot doesn't go unnoticed. Some of your earlier admirers, especially the young intellectuals, start to question you. Where is the Catherine who corresponded with Voltaire, they ask. What happened to reform? You respond with a smile and another round of state-sponsored lectures on loyalty, patriotism, and the dangers of foreign ideologies. You don't crush dissent with iron. You smother it with politeness, bureaucracy, and boredom. You turn revolution into a paperwork problem. But while France descends into guillotine mania, you turn your attention back to something you actually enjoy. Expansion. Yes, again. Because nothing silences critics quite like redrawing the map in your favour. This time, your eyes land on a familiar target. Poland. That fragile, fractured kingdom to the west, always full of noble squabbling and convenient excuses for intervention. You've already meddled there before, installed a puppet king, played at constitutional advisor, reined in their parliament like a babysitter with a wine hangover. But now the Polish nobles are trying something radical, a constitution, a real one, inspired by Enlightenment ideals, with rights, laws, balance of power. You read a translated copy, blink slowly, and then pour yourself a very strong drink. You cannot allow this. A liberal Poland on your western border is like building a bonfire next to a powder magazine. So, in 1793, you move, swiftly, decisively, and with all the polite paperwork imperial diplomacy requires. You orchestrate the second partition of Poland, carving up huge swaths of territory with the help of Prussia. Austria, for once, is too busy watching the French Revolution unravel to complain. Poland barely has time to gasp before it's bleeding from both sides. Fringe historical fact. You actually considered giving Poland a reform package years earlier, a kind of Enlightenment starter pack. Education reforms, limited religious tolerance, a diet version of legal equality. But now that they've tried to do it without you, now they're dangerous. Now they need to be dismantled. And dismantle you do. Still, the Poles fight back. In 1794, a fiery general named Tadeusz Kościuszko, fresh from helping the Americans in their revolution, leads an uprising against Russian occupation. For a brief, glorious moment, it looks like Poland might have one last act in her. Cities rise, Russian garrisons are driven out, crowds cheer, and the word freedom hangs in the air like smoke from a cannon. But your army is massive, well-trained, and completely unamused. The rebellion is crushed, Kościuszko is captured, and in 1795 the Third Partition of Poland finishes what history started. The country disappears from the map, just gone, absorbed, erased. Russia gets the biggest slice naturally, and you once again prove that you don't just talk empire, you eat it. This, of course, sparks another scholarly tug-of-war. Was your destruction of Poland a betrayal of your Enlightenment image, or just realpolitik at its finest? Were you defending Russia from chaos, or crushing a nation trying to evolve on its own terms? You, of course, frame it as a favour. You say Poland was ungovernable, that you were restoring order, that the peasants will be happier under your rule. It sounds suspiciously familiar. Fringe side note. Despite your suppression of the Polish uprisings, you still collect Polish art, sponsor Polish musicians, and once said privately that Kościuszko might have made a fine minister if he'd been born Russian. You never could resist a talented rebel. Back in Russia, your popularity remains strong, but it's shifting. The nobles love you. They always have. You've protected their rights, expanded their power over serfs, and made them feel like co-rulers in a glittering autocracy. But among the educated classes, there's a subtle change in the air. They're still loyal, still respectful. But they've started asking quieter questions. Not about your crown, but about your contradictions. You still speak of law, but you rule by decree. You build schools, but ban books. You quote philosophers, then jail their admirers. You are Catherine the Great, unquestioned, unrivaled, but even greatness casts a shadow. And, through it all, one question begins to hum beneath the surface. How long can one woman hold a continent together with sheer will and beautiful handwriting? You thought the storm had passed, didn't you? After the wars, the rebellions, the treaties signed with gold pens and bloodstains, you might have imagined you'd earned a moment to exhale, to bask in your legacy, sip tea on a snow-dusted balcony, maybe take a leisurely ride through a city named after you. But no, not in Russia, not ever. The empire may bow to you in public, but it grumbles in private, and just when you think the fire's gone out, it flares up again, from a place you'd rather forget. The edges. This time, the threat doesn't come from elegant parliaments or powdered revolutionaries. It comes from the Cossack frontier. Specifically, a man named Yemelyan Pugachev. Oh wait, no. That was years ago. This time, it's not one man, but a system. A pattern of unrest, stretched across the empire like a crack in a frozen lake. Quiet until it isn't. After the final partition of Poland and the humiliating fall of the French monarchy, you expect a kind of stability. You've made your moves, redrawn your maps, silenced the worst of the Enlightenment noise. The nobility is fat and loyal, the church is tamed, and your generals are mostly behaving. You should feel safe. But something else is stirring. Let's look outside the palace walls. The peasants, the majority of your subjects, are miserable, still, always. You've seen the reports. Famine in Kazan, tax riots near the Volga, brutal landlords who treat their estates like personal empires. You've tried some band-aid solutions. You've passed edicts limiting corporal punishment and encouraged humane management, which is about as effective as telling a bear not to steal honey. You remember what happened with Pugachev? You remember the burnt estates, the murdered noble families, the letters written in blood and sent north as a warning. And while no single rebel is rising yet, the conditions are still there, like dry timber waiting for a match. And now that you've absorbed more territory, Polish land, Ukrainian plains, Baltic provinces, you've added more peasants, more cultures, more anger to the pile. Meanwhile, the nobility continues to live in a world so detached from reality, it might as well be fiction. In St. Petersburg, balls are thrown with fountains of champagne and ice sculptures of mythological creatures that melt faster than the nobles' attention spans. There's a count who keeps peacocks in his music room, and a duchess who bathes in milk for her skin. All while 1,000 miles away, entire villages survive on frozen turnips and hope. You, Catherine, have never been blind to this. But lately you're starting to feel the weight of the contradiction pressing a little harder. You still need the nobles. Without them, your administrative reforms collapse. Your taxes dry up. Your military officers start writing poetry instead of orders. But you also know the truth. They're the problem, or at least a problem. They rule over the serfs with no oversight, and every time you try to impose one, they remind you that you're still, technically, a usurper. Let's pause for a quirky footnote. Despite your iron grip on power, you still receive hundreds of petitions each year from peasants, hoping you'll intervene personally in local disputes. They address you as Little Mother, begging you to punish cruel landlords, return stolen land, or just, feed them. You read more of them than you should. You scribble notes in the margins. Sometimes you intervene. More often, you file it away, knowing your hands are tied by the very system you built. And here comes the scholarly tension. Was Catherine a reformer stuck in a feudal trap, or an autocrat who played Enlightenment dress-up to dazzle Europe? The answer, maddeningly, is still both. You genuinely care about improving lives. You also genuinely care about maintaining control. You're not a villain, but you're not a saint either. You're a ruler, and ruling Russia means choosing between slow progress and sudden collapse. Every single day. So instead of pushing new reforms on serfdom, which you know would make the nobility scream and the empire wobble, you shift focus. You go back to what doesn't spark insurrections. Education, infrastructure, art. You greenlight new schools in annexed territories. You build more roads, more bridges, more postal stations. You commission a new round of medical reforms, including updated training for midwives and rural doctors. Fringe fact, you were obsessed with improving maternity care in the provinces. You believed healthy mothers meant stronger future citizens, and you pushed for midwife schools long before anyone else in Europe thought childbirth was something to plan for rather than survive. Behind the crown, behind the marble halls, you're still a woman who never forgot what it meant to bleed alone. Meanwhile, the idea of Russia, the brand if you will, is working. Your image as the enlightened autocrat holds strong abroad. You're seen as a stabilizer, a modernizer, a necessary counterweight to revolutionary France. Diplomats still describe you with a mix of awe and confusion, a woman ruling with the decisiveness of a man but with none of the messiness. She walks like she was born with a scepter in her hand, one ambassador writes, probably while hiding his fear behind too much port. At home, your court continues its glittering masquerade. Lovers come and go, though none ever quite fill the empty space Potemkin left. Your latest favourite is younger, charming, well-mannered, and perfectly forgettable. He writes poetry. You pretend to like it. Everyone knows the drill, but your real passion now is legacy. You're not here to flirt, you're here to last. So, you return to a project you've been stewing over for years, the complete codification of Russian laws. It sounds dry, but you see it as the capstone to your reign. A sweeping, rational, accessible legal code that will outlive you. Your nakaz was the dream. This will be the reality. You assemble legal minds, historians, bureaucrats. You comb through centuries of contradictory edicts and outdated punishments. You want clarity, simplicity, a Russia that governs itself by law, not whim. And still, the unrest simmers, quietly, in the background. Like a kettle that never quite boils but never cools down either. You hear rumours, Cossacks growing restless, Polish nationalists plotting in the shadow of your new borders, a new generation of thinkers writing essays about equality, this time with sharper edges. You've banned the most radical texts, but ideas have legs, and you can't shoot legs. Fringe detail to close on. Around this time, you order a private, custom-made desk with dozens of hidden compartments. One drawer for petitions, one for diplomatic correspondence, another for unfinished edicts, another for forbidden books you're not supposed to have but read anyway. A desk for a woman who sees everything, who stores ideas like weapons, and who knows that even in an empire sometimes the smallest drawer holds the biggest threat. You sit there most nights, quill in hand, empire on your shoulders, 1,000 voices in your ears. Some praise, some plead, some whisper treason in borrowed French, and you think, not yet, not while I'm still breathing. The trouble with enlightenment is that everyone wants to be the one holding the torch, but no one wants to be the one standing in its light. You, Catherine, have played the part of philosopher queen better than most. You've done the salons, the manifestos, the letters to Voltaire. You've funded schools, built libraries, translated half of Europe into Russian, and quoted Locke in full ceremonial gowns. But lately you can feel the glow dimming. The same ideas you once championed are starting to feel dangerous, sharp, ungrateful. And the people repeating your old slogans are younger, louder, and far less respectful of thrones. So you begin to clamp down. Not overtly, not at first. You're far too skilled for that. Instead, you reach for your most comfortable tool, censorship. Thoughtful, elegant, bureaucratic censorship. Books are reviewed more carefully. Foreign publications are slowed at the border. A few journals mysteriously fail to receive funding. You don't burn books. You just make sure the wrong ones never arrive. You want ideas, but only the right kind. Enlightenment, yes, but curated, controlled. The kind of a light that flatters the crown, not questions it. Meanwhile, your court is brighter than ever, ironically. While your patience for radicalism wanes, your appetite for performance grows. The Winter Palace becomes a carousel of elegance. Masquerades, plays, imported musicians, ornate banquets where peacocks are served whole and everyone pretends. That's not wildly impractical. You host ambassadors in rooms more expensive than their entire kingdoms. You wear diamonds in the shape of your own monogram. You once told someone you didn't care much for jewels, only for beauty. That was a lie. You care about both. Greatly. And let's not forget your entourage. Your favourites keep rotating. Young men, usually in uniform, usually with poetic aspirations and impressive cheekbones. They rarely last long, but while they're in, they're in. They get titles, estates, money, tailor-made uniforms, even personalised state apartments. Your critics call it debauchery. You call it hiring internally. You once joked that choosing a lover was like choosing a minister, except ministers didn't have to be charming. You've never apologised for this. Why should you? You rule. You write the rules. Here's a fringe fact that says more than you meant it to. You once designed a custom badge of honour in the shape of your profile to be worn only by your current favourite. Court gossip had a full-time job keeping track of who had the badge and who didn't. It was less a fashion choice and more a live update on imperial affection. But behind the glitter, you're still working. Always. You don't just run the empire, you know it. You're deep in legal reform, still editing drafts by candlelight. You dictate decrees. You push medical modernisation forward. You obsess over vaccination numbers. You approve textbook revisions. You worry about famine relief in the provinces, even as you attend a masquerade where a noblewoman arrives dressed as the goddess of spring, trailing actual birds in her train. And then comes a problem wrapped in silk and smugness. Your son, Paul. He's a man now, technically. He's married, has children of his own, and still manages to behave like a teenager whose inheritance is 5 minutes late. He resents you. Openly. He says you've kept him from power. You have. He says you never trusted him. You didn't. He accuses you of turning the court against him, of using him as a placeholder instead of an heir, and honestly, he's not entirely wrong. But what he doesn't understand, what you can never quite explain, is that his mere existence is a threat. If you had stepped aside for him 20 years ago, Russia would have collapsed into amateur hour by now. His policies are erratic, his temper fragile, his worldview medieval. He believes in absolute rule, not enlightened rule. He wants obedience, not order. And he idolises his father, that half-broken Peter III you deposed like a wine-stained rug. So you keep Paul close but not influential. He gets titles, lands, a palace of his own. He's allowed to tour Europe, collect art, play emperor in the mirror. But you do not let him near the machinery of the state. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You've even started whispering about a different succession plan, one that skips Paul entirely and jumps to his son, your beloved grandson, Alexander. It's all theoretical, of course. Nothing's written. But Paul hears the whispers, and he broods. Fringe side note. Paul had his own little court, where he enforced weird rules just to feel powerful. Things like banning round tables and insisting that servants salute doors. You once referred to his palace as a military academy for manners, which was both cutting and accurate. But even as the family drama bubbles, your grip on the throne remains firm. The people still love you. Well, most of them. The nobles adore you, or at least fear you in a flattering way. The church stays obedient, and your cultural projects continue to bloom. The Hermitage is now one of the richest museums in Europe. You've collected not just paintings and sculpture, but ideas. Ideas preserved under glass, protected from the kinds of revolutions currently eating France alive. Speaking of France, it's still on fire. The revolution that once seemed like a flare-up is now a 5-alarm blaze. The monarchy is gone. The guillotine is in constant use. Radicalism has turned into regular policy. You shake your head. This was never what Enlightenment meant to you. This isn't order or justice or reason. It's chaos with a manifesto. You once entertained French philosophers at your court. Now you'd have them arrested. Russia, you decide, will not follow. Not under your watch. So you tighten your control. You expand the powers of the third section, your secret police. You order surveillance of intellectual circles, student groups, foreign visitors. You make lists. You approve censors. The line between reformer and ruler vanishes completely. You are the law now, the system, the legacy. And yet, you still believe in beauty. You still take daily walks in your palace gardens, feeding birds and commenting on cloud formations. You write plays, bad ones, honestly, and insist they be performed. You host costume balls with historical themes where you dress as Empress Elizabeth one week and a Roman senator the next. You maintain the dream, the pageant, the illusion of the philosopher empress, even as you become something more absolute. And in the quiet hours, when the court has gone to bed and the candles are low, you reread the nakaz. That document you wrote in your youth, filled with hope, idealism, and the words of men who died thinking freedom could be organised like a chessboard. You wonder what they'd say now. Would they still write you letters? Or would they sharpen their quills against your crown? You close the pages. You don't need their approval, because Russia is quiet, and you're still breathing. There's a particular kind of power in collecting things, knowing you have what others want and can't have. You, Catherine, have always understood this better than most, not just in terms of politics or people, but objects, symbols, culture, art. And as you grow older, as war, policy, and your own family continue to pull and tug at the edges of your patience, you turn more and more to your great private obsession, the Hermitage. This is no longer just a gallery or a hobby or a charming distraction, as some ministers have called it behind your back. No, the Hermitage Museum is your empire in miniature. Its corridors are filled with more than gold frames and imported marble. It holds your taste, your vision, your will. While kings are losing their heads in France, and your son pouts like a snubbed debutante, you are building something permanent. You're not just buying art, you're staging a cultural heist. While Europe bleeds, you quietly outbid every monarch, merchant and duke too distracted or too broke to compete. One of your most delicious acquisitions? The Walpole collection, once the pride of England's grandest estate. When the descendants of Robert Walpole, Britain's first de facto prime minister, found themselves in need of funds, you didn't hesitate. You scooped up their paintings like shiny trinkets at a yard sale. Raphael's, Rembrandt's, Rubens's, all packed up and carted across half the continent like prizes. Fringe detail. When the crates arrived in St. Petersburg, you opened them yourself. Each canvas was handled under your supervision, catalogued in your own elegant handwriting, arranged exactly as you envisioned. Not because you didn't trust your curators, but because no one else could see what you saw, that Russia, through you, was rewriting its place in the world. The Hermitage grows from a private gallery into something resembling a palace of the mind. By the time you're done, it contains thousands of works, from the Italian Renaissance to Dutch masters, Greek antiquities to 18th century French portraiture. And while the public will not see it for decades, your court still refers to it as the small Hermitage, a private sanctuary. You know that what you're doing will outlive you. Art is more than ornament, it's proof. Proof that Russia is not only powerful but civilized. Of course, your critics don't quite get it. She buys paintings while peasants starve, they whisper. She writes poems while Europe burns. Let them. They don't understand that your art collecting is a kind of war. You are taking culture, ripping it from the hands of France, of England, of the crumbling European aristocracy, and folding it into your empire. They conquer by fire. You conquer with oil and canvas. But let's not pretend you're doing it alone. Every empress needs enablers, and you've assembled the best. At the heart of your acquisitions is Melchior Grimm, your longtime Parisian contact and former lover. He has connections, charm, and a marvellous sense of what will impress you most. His letters read like shopping lists for the gods. One Fragonard, one bust of Caesar. Possibly a small Caravaggio if the Italians will stop arguing. You also work with Diderot, though he's a little trickier. Once your Enlightenment pen pal and favourite, philosopher in residence, he's now watching the French Revolution with a mixture of horror and awe. His letters are less flirtatious now, more urgent, more melancholy. He believes the world is changing, must change, and while he still admires you, he wonders if you're keeping pace. You don't answer directly, but you keep buying art. Let's pause for a deliciously weird side note. You once acquired a life-size mechanical peacock from England, complete with gears and a clockwork tail that fans out on command. You displayed it in the Hermitage next to a collection of ancient Greek coins, just to confuse people. To this day, it's unclear whether this was a metaphor or just good taste. And all this collecting, this consuming of Europe's finest works, feeds into something else, your campaign to shape Russian identity. The more Europe doubts you, the more you lean into becoming Europe, then outshining it. You commission Russian artists to copy the masters, to learn their brushstrokes, then evolve beyond them. You invite architects to design palaces that blend neoclassicism with Russian flourishes. You fund theatres. You build the Imperial Academy of Arts into something students dream of attending instead of escaping. Culture isn't decoration, it's infrastructure. Meanwhile, politics continues its exhausting march. France is in its terror phase now. Executions by the dozen, the monarchy long gone, the guillotine officially part of public life. You ban French books entirely. You call the revolution a plague. And yet, you still correspond with thinkers on the edge of it all. Secretly, carefully. You don't trust them. But you can't quite quit them either. You want to know how far this goes, how deep this unravelling gets. At home, the atmosphere begins to curdle. You tighten censorship. The secret police grow bolder. You approve more surveillance. And still the nobles don't complain. Because they remember. They remember Pugachev. They remember what happens when the masses start quoting pamphlets. They like your authority now. It keeps them rich, keeps them breathing. And then, amid all this, art, revolution, censorship, you decide to throw a party. Not just any party. A festival of Russian greatness, staged to show the world, and your critics, that you're not some aging autocrat buried under books and worry. The Winter Palace is transformed into a theatre of power. There are fireworks, fountains dyed with wine, and mechanical gondolas floating down canals lined with lanterns. There's a man dressed as Peter the Great who recites poetry while juggling apples. You ride through the crowds in a custom carriage painted with scenes of your victories, literal propaganda on wheels. Fringe fact, at one point during the festival, someone stages a ballet with dancers dressed as your favourite historical philosophers. Montesquieu twirls, Voltaire pirouettes. You laugh until you cry, then order an encore. Some say this was vanity. Some say it was distraction. But you know the truth. It was a performance, yes, but also a spell. You were conjuring the future you wanted, one where Russia is respected, feared, envied, where art isn't something imported, it's something expected. You were drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is who we are now. But the applause eventually fades. The torches go out. And in the quiet aftermath, you return to your desk, your reports, your maps, your aging hands and restless mind. You can still hear the echoes of revolution in the distance, still smell the blood on France's wind. But here, in your gallery, in your palace, in your carefully arranged empire of images, everything is quiet, for now. And you think, if the world must end, at least it will end beautifully. You've always had a thing for maps, not the decorative kind hung in parlours to impress visitors, But the real ones, gritty, sprawling, half-finished sketches of power and possibility. The kind of maps where borders bleed and names change with a swipe of a quill. And lately, the one you've been staring at most is Poland. Again, still, forever. That exhausted, tangled neighbour who just refuses to die quietly. You've already taken 2 bites out of it, once with Prussia, once with Austria. It was diplomatic theatre, really. Everyone got a slice, no one protested too loudly, and the peasants kept farming whether they were Polish, Russian, or just very confused. But now it's 1795, and Poland is trying to rise from the grave once more, with nobles waving constitutions and generals shouting about independence. You're not in the mood. You don't even pretend this time. No long letters about balance of power or protecting your Orthodox brethren. No moral justifications, just action. Ruthless, calculated, final. You send your troops in from the east while Prussia closes from the west. Austria sighs, shrugs, and joins, because why not? No one wants to be left out of the feast. And just like that, Poland is gone, wiped from the map, erased. And here's the part that really gets the historians arguing. Did you do it to protect your empire, or because you simply couldn't resist one last move on the board? You, of course, say it's about order, about protecting Russia from chaos, about saving Polish peasants from their incompetent nobility. But privately you admit something else, something small and cold. If you didn't take it, someone else would. Fringe fact, after the Third Partition, you ordered a special medal struck to commemorate the restoration of order in Western provinces. It featured your profile on one side and on the other, a seated woman offering a scroll to a kneeling peasant. There were, let's say, creative interpretations of what order meant in that scroll. But it wasn't just conquest for conquest's sake. You had plans. You saw these new lands as raw material, ready to be folded into your empire, refined, civilized. You dispatched teachers, surveyors, tax collectors, priests. You sent in architects to Russify the cities, public squares reimagined, Orthodox churches rising over Catholic spires. The same pattern you've used everywhere. Erase, rebuild, educate, or at least try. Because let's be honest, not everyone wants to be remade. In Lithuania, in Ukraine, in annexed Polish territories, resistance simmers, quietly. Sometimes through pamphlets, sometimes through minor uprisings, sometimes through cold stares at your emissaries. You respond the way you always do, with a velvet glove over an iron fist. You set up schools, you offer tax incentives, and when that doesn't work, you tighten the screws. Arrests, bans, exiles, and all of this is happening while Europe continues its spectacular collapse. France has gone from monarchy to republic to revolutionary bloodbath to something that vaguely resembles a dictatorship with a new mascot, Napoleon Bonaparte. You've been watching him carefully, this little Corsican upstart with the posture of Caesar and the diplomacy of a cannonball. He's young, ambitious, military to the bone, and terrifyingly good at turning mobs into armies. You can't help but feel curious. You've seen men like this before, but not quite like him. If you were 20 years younger, you'd write him a letter, maybe more. But now, you just circle his name in the red ink and whisper to your advisors that France isn't finished, not by a long shot. And still, you rule, tirelessly. You're approaching your 70s now, but you don't slow down. You rise early, write constantly, edit laws, review art acquisitions, approve new agricultural techniques, comment on opera librettos. Your mind stays sharp, even as your body starts reminding you that empires aren't the only things that crack over time. You've started surrounding yourself with younger advisors again, bright-eyed idealists and silver-tongued bureaucrats who flatter you just enough to stay interesting. But there's no Potemkin here, no one who sees behind the mask. They try, they fail, you smile. You've grown accustomed to being the smartest person in every room, and it's lonely in the way only powerful solitude can be. Let's dip into another strange fringe fact. Around this time, you develop a fascination with clocks. Not in the decorative sense, but in the mechanical, intricate way they function. You collect them, repair them. There's even a rumour you kept a dismantled timepiece on your desk, gears and springs spread out like a puzzle, as a reminder that every system, even one as vast as Russia, has to be wound carefully, or it stops. You're still winding, and yet a strange feeling has started to creep in. Not dread. You've never been afraid of death, but urgency, like the empire still isn't finished, and time is slipping through your fingers like powdered snow. You start dictating more rapidly, pushing your advisors harder. You talk of building new universities, of finishing the civil code, of beginning a great philosophical essay that will explain your reign. You say this while coughing, while wincing from joint pain, while your doctors whisper that perhaps you should rest. You don't. There's still too much to do. But something is shifting. You notice your son Paul walking taller, speaking more loudly, consulting with foreign envoys as if your absence were inevitable. He's still pompous, still obsessed with military uniforms and imaginary protocols. But you see in him a flicker of readiness, not for rule perhaps, but for grabbing it. You don't fear him, but you don't trust him either. You begin drafting secret letters, guidelines for your grandson Alexander, suggestions for ministers, instructions for the next phase of reform. You're planning for a future that you won't see, not because you're sentimental, because you're a builder. You've spent your life laying bricks. Someone else will have to finish the cathedral. Then comes the fall of 1796. The frost returns. You're tired, but still writing, still attending meetings, still correcting grammar on state documents, because, really, how hard is it to spell sovereignty correctly? You host one final dinner. You smile, you laugh, you make plans for the weekend, and then, one morning, you collapse. The palace goes silent, then frantic. Servants scatter, doctors arrive, ministers pace. Paul is already whispering in corners, already trying on the crown in his mind. You do not wake. Not that day, not the next. And just like that, the reign of Catherine the Great, the girl from Prussia who became the soul of an empire, ends. Fringe detail, your death certificate, written in a rush, simply states apoplectic stroke, a tidy phrase for a life that was anything but. The maps will remember you, the cities, the laws, the buildings filled with light. And the people, they'll remember you too, some with awe, some with anger, some with whispered jokes in taverns about lovers and letters and the weight of crowns. But the empire will never forget. The snow falls differently after you die. It's quieter somehow, thicker, more deliberate, as if even the weather's trying to process what just happened. Catherine the Great is gone. And for one breathless moment all of Russia exhales, not in relief, not quite, but in that stunned silence that comes when something enormous has stopped moving. Like a great machine humming for decades, suddenly still. You don't get a funeral worthy of your own standards. Oh, it's official and grand enough. Coffin gilded, banners draped, the royal choir mourning on cue, but it feels rushed, inevitable. There's already a new script being written before your body's even cold. Because Paul, your son, your long sidelined, long resentful heir, finally has the thing he's been craving like a wolf at the window, the throne. And Paul doesn't walk into power, he storms it. Crown first, ego second, vengeance a very close third. The first thing he does? Undo you. Seriously. He digs right into the heart of your legacy like a petty archaeologist. Decrees are reversed, titles revoked, courtiers dismissed, statues quietly moved or accidentally dropped. He even bans your portraits from certain rooms in the palace. Not because he doesn't know your greatness, but because he does. And it's unbearable. Fringe fact. Within weeks of taking power, Paul issues an imperial order requiring all women at court to follow a strict dress code based on 17th century styles. No more French gowns, no more casual elegance. Everyone is to wear corsets that make breathing optional, and hairstyles that make walking through doors a challenge. People call it Paul's revenge fashion. You would have rolled your eyes so hard you'd see the back of your own crown. But here's the thing. Despite the chaos, the revisions, the petty edits, he can't erase you. Your fingerprints are everywhere. Every province, every restructured court, every standardized law book still bears your invisible initials. The roads you paved are still used. The cities you founded still buzz with life. And the Hermitage, He walks through it like a trespasser, never quite comfortable, never quite able to say the word mine. Still, he tries. He reforms the succession laws just to make a point. You had ruled without strict male line legitimacy, and he hated that. So now inheritance must go from father to son. No exceptions, no loopholes. It's neat, mathematical, and feels like a slap to your memory. And honestly, it is. But Paul's obsession with control makes him reckless. He tries to overhaul the military overnight, issues endless orders about uniforms, drills, salutes, changing details no one cares about until everyone cares too much. He sends letters to foreign rulers that are more tantrum than treaty. He bans things seemingly at random. French plays, pocket watches, even certain kinds of carriage wheels. His court becomes tense, formal, and deeply paranoid. People whisper, a lot, and not just behind closed doors. Ministers begin to distance themselves. Ambassadors send increasingly worried reports home. Your grandson Alexander, the one you adored, starts attracting attention. Quiet praise, soft promises, maybe even a little conspiracy. Because people remember your reign. The elegance, the competence, the vision. Now they look around and see powdered wigs shaking under Paul's gaze, and they start to think, maybe the past wasn't so bad. And then, in 1801, it happens. Paul is murdered, strangled in his own palace by a group of conspirators who claim they want to save Russia. They do not weep. They barely bother to cover it up. And Alexander, your sweet, thoughtful, carefully raised grandson, wakes up to find himself Tsar. He hadn't asked for it. Not like this. But he takes it, with wide eyes and heavy shoulders, and here begins the next chapter of your legacy. Because while Paul tried to bury you, Alexander, whether he admits it or not, starts digging you up. He returns the court to a more relaxed elegance, reopens correspondence with foreign intellectuals, revisits your notes, implements reforms you'd begun sketching in your final months. He even talks about continuing your great unfinished project, the Civil Code. He tells his advisors he wants Russia to be modern. That word again. The one you wore like perfume and armour. But he's no copy of you. Alexander has his own path, his own traumas. And the world he inherits is not the one you left behind. Napoleon is no longer just a name circled in red ink. He's the Emperor of France now, and the very concept of monarchy is wobbling like a table with one leg hacked off. You would have loved the chess game, the strategy, the letters, the wars, maybe not, but the positioning? Absolutely. You were always more general than grandmother. Still, let's not drift too far, because this section, this pause in the noise, is about you. Not Paul, not Alexander, you and what you left behind. Let's take stock. You ruled for 34 years, outlived 2 husbands, 1 real, 1 installed. You expanded Russian territory by over 200,000 square miles, founded new cities, reorganized the provinces, created a national education system, built hospitals, started smallpox inoculation campaigns, made the Russian language a tool of government, not just peasantry, corresponded with nearly every major thinker of your age, translated foreign works, wrote plays, fought wars, won most of them, lost none of your grip, and yes, you took lovers. Many. Some call this scandalous. Some call it strategic. You never apologized. You liked company, wit, and beauty. And if men could do it, why not you? Let's not sanitize you either. You crushed rebellions, expanded serfdom in some regions, signed off on executions, played politics with chilling ease. You were not soft. You were not gentle. You were powerful. Fringe footnote. After your death, a British writer claimed that you had worn the soul of a Caesar in the skin of a siren, which honestly sounds like something you'd commission in gold lettering for your bedroom wall. And now you're a legend. The peasants still curse your taxes, sure, but they also name their daughters Yekaterina and whisper stories of the little mother who once rode through the provinces alone, unguarded, just to see how they lived. The nobles, even the ones who toasted Paul, eventually hang your portrait again. Quietly. At first, then proudly. You, Catherine, become myth. Not a lie, but a version. A story polished by time, stripped of contradiction, given to schoolchildren and sculptors and playwrights who all need a heroine to hold on to. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Because in a world where revolutions burn hot and kings vanish like snow in spring, you managed to do something almost no one else did. You stayed, you ruled, you mattered. And centuries from now, when the palaces have turned to museums and the ministers are just names in dusty books, there will still be light slanting through the windows of the Hermitage, across paintings you chose, in halls you filled, under a sky that still remembers you. History doesn't really end. It echoes, and your echo, Catherine, doesn't fade. It deepens. Decade after decade, your name threads through classrooms, revolutions, imperial reforms, gossip columns, and scholarly brawls. You become not just an empress, but a concept, a measuring stick, a cautionary tale, a feminist icon, a villain, a visionary, a contradiction too large to be filed under any single heading. The Russia you left behind, let's not sugarcoat it, is a colossus straining at its seams. The nobles are rich and increasingly bored. The serfs are poor and increasingly angry. The bureaucracy is bloated, beautiful on paper, infuriating in practice. And yet, it all still functions, thanks in no small part to the machinery you built. The maps still bear your edits. The legal system still uses your frameworks. The schools you established are now producing thinkers who will challenge the very empire you helped expand. You laid the groundwork for a state so complex it could barely understand itself. And for better or worse, no one can undo it. Not even Paul with his powdered vengeance. Not even Alexander with his dreamy idealism. You didn't just rule Russia, you wrote it, in longhand, with notes in the margins. Let's step outside the palace for a moment, down into the countryside, into the forests and fields and the quiet provinces far from the winter palace's mirrored corridors. Here, peasants still speak your name with an odd mixture of reverence and resentment. You are Catherine the Merciful in some villages and Catherine the Tax-Hungry in others. In some places, old women still tell stories of how you once rode alone in a sleigh through the blizzard to deliver justice to a corrupt landlord. Not true, of course, but truth has never been the point of legends. Fringe fact: in the decades after your death, travellers reported entire villages claiming to have housed you in disguise. How you once arrived with a single guard, how you dined with the poorest family, how you left a gold coin under a peasant's plate. Completely fictional, completely believable. Meanwhile, in St. Petersburg, the court has become something else entirely. Under your successors, it swells with protocol and peacocks. The elegance remains, but the energy fades. You ruled with your intellect sharpened like a dagger under all that silk. They rule by committee, by caution, by inherited title. The spark you lit, the dangerous enlightenment-fueled ambition to create something better, is slowly replaced with survival. But your shadow still lingers. Every time a female monarch rises anywhere in Europe, your name comes up. Another Catherine, they ask usually, with raised eyebrows. Every time a Russian leader invokes modernization, they reach back to you. Your reforms, your letters, your stubborn obsession with pushing Russia forward, even when it refused to be pushed. And of course, your personal life continues to be rehashed with a level of fascination usually reserved for movie stars and scandalous novels. Let's talk about that for a moment. The myth, the gossip, the stuff whispered in drawing rooms and published centuries later with dramatic italics. Because, it gets weird. The most infamous rumour, that you died attempting an intimate encounter with a horse? Yes, really. No, obviously not. And yet, the story persists. Why? Probably because no powerful woman is ever allowed to just be powerful. She must be punished in death with a legend that turns her into a grotesque. You, the empress who outmaneuvered generals, wrote legal codes, outlived coups, and restructured half a continent, reduced to a vulgar joke told by men who couldn't comprehend your dominance. Fringe fact: that particular rumour became so persistent that, by the late 1800s, it was included as a footnote in actual history books. Carefully worded, of course, academic, but still there, like a poison passed down through syllables. And you? You'd have laughed, loudly. Then commissioned a tapestry mocking the rumour, then invited the rumour's originator to a dinner party and seated him next to your tax collector. But beyond the myths, the memory of you sharpens. Scholars argue over your letters, they analyse your grammar, they trace changes in your signature across decades, as if each curve of your quill might explain some secret motive. They publish entire volumes debating whether you were a true Enlightenment monarch or just really good at playing one on stage. And here's the irony. They all think they're getting closer to the real you. But the real you, she was a performance too. Not a lie, just a carefully curated truth. The Prussian girl who remade herself into a Russian goddess. The student of philosophy who became a mistress of empire. The woman who wrote love letters between writing laws. You didn't just live history, you crafted it. Like one of those mechanical clocks you adored. Every piece in place. Every spring coiled with purpose. Your art collection becomes one of the greatest in the world. The Hermitage opens its doors to the public eventually, and visitors walk through the halls you once filled alone. They stare at the Rembrandts you bought, the sculptures you repositioned by candlelight. They don't realise they're walking through your mind. But they are. Room by room. Your correspondence is still read. Students quote your nakaz like scripture. Some praise it as revolutionary. Others point out the hypocrisy of a woman who spoke of liberty while tightening the chains of serfdom. And you know what? They're all right. Because you are a contradiction. So is every great ruler. The trick is embracing it, without apology. Meanwhile, Russia keeps changing. Napoleon comes and goes. Alexander has his moment of glory, then his slow unravelling. More emperors follow, some inspired, some disastrous. Serfdom finally ends in 1861, 65 years after your death. If you'd lived, maybe it would have ended sooner. Maybe it never could have happened under you at all. That's the thing with legacies. No matter how carefully you write them, someone else holds the eraser. Fringe footnote. In 1873, a minor noblewoman claims in her diary that Catherine appeared to her in a dream and told her that the Russian Empire had lost its rhythm. The entry is dismissed as hysteria. Still, it spreads. People want you to haunt them. Some even hope for it. But you don't need ghosts. You left plenty of evidence. Your story becomes a favourite for playwrights and novelists. The West romanticizes you as a bold, sexy, tragic heroine. Russia elevates you as a national icon. Feminists study you. Monarchists mourn you. Revolutionaries quote you, awkwardly, selectively, sometimes sarcastically. You are called many things. The great always comes last. It always will. And as the world stumbles toward its next round of disasters, industrial revolutions, world wars, new ideologies with old grudges, you remain there, steady on the bookshelf, in the footnotes, in the museum plaques. The candlelight of your age flickers in the distance, casting your silhouette across time. And somewhere, in a quiet room, a girl opens a book about a German princess who became the ruler of the largest country on earth and thinks, why not me? Centuries move quickly in hindsight. You're barely buried, and already the world you tried so hard to master is slipping out of its old silk gloves and into soot-stained factory sleeves. It's the 19th century now, and your Russia, vast, gilded and balanced precariously on the backs of 20 million serfs, is starting to creak under its own weight. The empire you left behind grows larger, yes, but heavier, hungrier, more confused about what it is supposed to be. Still proud, still autocratic, but haunted by your ghost in every room that matters. Your name becomes a reference point. Whenever a new Tsar sits the throne, comparisons to you come like clockwork. Not as clever as Catherine, they say, less decisive than Catherine, lacks Catherine's grasp of European diplomacy, and on it goes. Even when they mean to praise the living, they end up praising you. They can't help it. You're the standard. The one who ruled not as someone's daughter, or someone's wife, or someone's placeholder, but as Catherine. Period. But the country starts to outgrow even your shadow. The industrial age crashes into Russia like a train through a tea party. Railroads are laid, cities swell, factories rise beside monasteries, and the people, those quiet background characters of your empire, begin to stir. They're not just peasants anymore. They're workers, readers, thinkers, organisers, and they're angry. Serfdom lingers like a terrible joke told too many times. It had already become a grotesque contradiction in your own time, millions chained to land while you spoke about justice over tea with Voltaire's ghost. But now, in a world of machines and printed ideas and rising literacy, it becomes unforgivable. The pressure builds decade after decade until in 1861, 65 years after you left the stage, Alexander II, your great-grandson, finally signs the Emancipation Manifesto. It's framed as a moral triumph, a new chapter, a great act of reform. But everyone knows the truth. It's also panic. Reform from above, as a way to prevent revolution from below, you'd probably understand, maybe even approve. You knew how thin the ice was, even in your day. Fringe fact. The bureaucrats in Alexander's government debated whether to quote your nakaz in the preamble to the Emancipation document. Some saw it as symbolic, a way to honour your early reformist spirit. Others argued it would be politically awkward, given your own contradictions on serfdom. In the end, they left it out. Meanwhile, your beloved hermitage becomes more than a jewel box. It opens its doors to the public. Slowly at first, timid and selective, but eventually fully. What was once your private retreat, your sanctuary of taste and power, becomes a museum, a secular temple. People line up to walk the halls you once stalked alone, to peer into your cabinets, to stand under paintings that once whispered only to you. They don't always know the names, but they feel the weight, the silence, the curation of it all. Even in death, you're still guiding the conversation. And then, of course, the 20th century happens, all at once. Russia convulses. Famines, wars, protests. The Tsar, your descendant, stands on a crumbling stage while the chorus of history demands a different play. In 1917, revolution finally arrives, not the kind you feared from France, elegant and pamphlet-shaped, but a rough, industrial collapse. Tsar Nicholas II is swept aside. The monarchy dies in a basement, bullets echoing where bells once rang. The empire you helped build dies with it. But you don't vanish. The Bolsheviks, with all their hatred of kings and queens, still can't stop talking about you. Lenin sneers at your decadence. Stalin studies your territorial expansions. Trotsky quotes your policies in military dispatches. You are, somehow, both the problem and the blueprint. They melt your statues but keep your borders, burn your letters but echo your strategies. The irony is almost unbearable. And here's the strangest twist of all. During the darkest years of Soviet rule, your memory survives. Quietly, through whispers, through paintings smuggled out of noble houses, through copies of your portraits that somehow avoid being seized. You become, again, a myth, a symbol of a time when Russia was feared and admired, not just powerful, but cultured. The Soviets try to replace you with steel and red banners, but deep down, some part of the Russian imagination still belongs to you. Fringe side note. During World War II, as Nazi bombs fell near Leningrad, the renamed St. Petersburg, Soviet curators risked everything to evacuate the Hermitage collection. Crates were buried in the Urals, trains slipped out in the night, and paintings were hidden under floorboards. Not because the state loved Catherine, but because the people did, enough to risk their lives for her collection. After the war, when Russia becomes the USSR in full, the cold, bureaucratic juggernaut, you remain strangely present. Not officially, of course. There are no parades in your name, but your busts reappear in universities. Your reforms are studied in law schools. Scholars in back offices read your correspondences under flickering lights and argue about your pragmatism. Were you a monarchist who played at being a reformer, or a reformer trapped in a monarchy? The Soviet answer is a shrug, a sigh, maybe both. And then the wall comes down. The Soviet Union collapses. Russia, stunned and broke, stands blinking in the cold, wondering who it is now. And guess who gets dusted off? You. Suddenly, the bookstores fill with biographies of Catherine the Great, documentaries, dramatizations, historians on TV explaining how you modernized, expanded, endured, how you governed with wit and force. You're back in fashion, a useful ancestor, a reminder that Russian greatness isn't just tanks and missiles, it's also art, intellect, diplomacy. But it's not just nostalgia. Your story speaks to something deeper, a kind of longing for vision, for purpose, for control paired with culture. People remember your glittering court, but also your sleepless nights drafting laws, your extravagant lovers, but also your obsession with vaccination programs, your silks and satire, your contradictions. You become a screen onto which the present projects its own desires. Some see you as a symbol of strong leadership, others as a feminist before her time, still others as a cautionary tale about ambition wrapped in idealism. In 2019, HBO airs a miniseries called Catherine the Great, with Helen Mirren playing you like a storm in heels. It's not entirely accurate what historical drama ever is, but it captures something real: your magnetism, your refusal to be neat, your insistence on being complicated in a world that demands simplicity. Fringe detail: a meme circulates in the early 2020s with a photo of your statue and the caption, "Catherine the Great ran a vast empire, spoke 5 languages, and still had time for drama." It goes viral. You would have adored it. And as Russia lurches through the 21st century, through new wars, new regimes, new uncertainties, your name stays on the table. A reminder, a warning, an aspiration. Because history doesn't end. It loops, it haunts, and your echo, Empress, is louder than ever. History has this habit of flattening people like coins. It presses you between textbooks and trivia, smooths out your edges, and leaves behind something shiny but suspiciously two-dimensional. Catherine the Great, it says, enlightened despot, builder of empire, collector of art, lover of lovers. Which is true, but also not the truth. Because you, Catherine, were never flat. You were a cathedral of contradictions, a woman who could write essays on justice while planning a military campaign, who could quote Plutarch while rewriting the criminal code, who held power with one hand and a quill with the other, and somehow never dropped either. In the centuries that follow your reign, the world keeps trying to decide what box you belong in. And you keep refusing to fit. Too imperial for the revolutionaries, too radical for the monarchists, too feminine for the traditionalists, too ruthless for the romantics, which of course makes you irresistible. In academic circles you become a kind of intellectual Rorschach test. One historian sees you as the last great absolute monarch, an empress who held the empire together by sheer personal will and 34 years of caffeine and stubbornness. Another sees you as a proto-liberal, a secret reformer born in the wrong century. A third reads your life as a feminist parable, the woman who played and beat the men at their own game. They're all trying to see through you, but they're really just seeing themselves. Fringe fact: by the late 20th century, there are over 700 scholarly articles written specifically on your use of personal image as political branding. That's right, long before Instagram, you were curating your own public persona. Paintings, medals, proclamations, busts, every angle calculated, every symbol chosen. You didn't just rule Russia, you ruled your narrative. Even your lovers become part of the myth. Some scholars obsess over them, as if each man you kissed unlocked some secret about your soul. Others wave them away, calling them distractions or worse, indulgences. But you treated love and power the same way you treated diplomacy, strategically, unapologetically, and with great taste in uniforms. You never let passion make you foolish, but you also never let anyone shame you for feeling it. And centuries later, people still argue whether that makes you dangerous or admirable. And then there's the nakaz, that little Enlightenment playbook you wrote, still pulled out by grad students who think they've discovered a forgotten gospel. It remains a kind of paradox in print, revolutionary in spirit, autocratic in application. You lifted from Montesquieu, Beccaria, Rousseau, and then cherry-picked the parts that didn't threaten the throne you'd spent so long polishing. That's what they don't get. You weren't trying to abolish autocracy. You were trying to make it make sense, to give it bones, laws, legs to stand on that, weren't just divine right and tradition. And while your words didn't transform Russia overnight, let's be honest, Russia doesn't do anything overnight. They stuck, like seeds in frozen ground, waiting. Some of them sprouted a century later. Some are still waiting. But they were planted, nonetheless. Even in popular culture, you keep showing up. Portraits of you hang in the oddest places. Libraries in Chicago, embassies in Berlin, the occasional niche coffee shop trying to be artsy. Writers keep putting you in novels, sometimes as the heroine, sometimes as the villain, always as the centerpiece. You are painted in metaphors, the moon of Russia, the Iron Mother, the last empress who understood. They give you tragic backstories, invented dialogues, dream sequences. They make up things you never said, but somehow they feel like things you might have said. You become part memory, part myth, part cultural shorthand for ambition in pearls. Fringe detail. In 2014, a Japanese manga features you as a time-travelling strategist who helps modern governments solve diplomatic crises. It's wildly inaccurate but weirdly charming, and it sparks an internet debate over whether Catherine the Great would have supported universal basic income. You're trending again. Congratulations. And even more bizarrely, if not more poetically, your name is whispered in circles far beyond politics or art. Psychologists reference you in papers on charisma and female leadership. Business schools mention your centralisation policies as a case study in organisational management. Fashion designers invoke your court style for runway collections. High collars, fur trim, regal blues. You are everything and everywhere all at once. A name, a symbol, a brand. Meanwhile, Russia itself goes through another cycle. Empire, revolution, repression, reform, collapse, reinvention. Over and over, and each time someone brings you up. Remember Catherine, they ask? She knew what she was doing. She didn't flinch. She had vision. Whether they mean it or not, whether they use it to criticise or to inspire, they can't let you go. Of course, the modern world doesn't belong to you. You're a visitor now, a haunting. But your values echo in strange places, in debates over education access, in arguments about surveillance and governance, in discussions about women in power, still framed like it's some kind of novelty. You'd be amused. You'd also be furious that the conversation is still stuck in the 18th century. Fringe footnote, there's an ongoing scholarly debate, yes, still, over whether you ever truly understood the Russian soul. A term so vague and romantic it barely means anything, but people throw it around like confetti. Did the German-born empress who ruled from a European lens really get Russia? The best answer comes from a Slavic historian who said, she understood Russia the way an architect understands a mountain, enough to build on it, but not enough to tame it. You would have liked that. Probably would have quoted it, then edited it for clarity. So now here we are, a world of fibre optics and electric cars and endless information. Your empire has been carved up and renamed, modernised and mythologized. The language you once tried to elevate has splintered into slang and speed. The gowns are gone. The palaces turned museums. The Enlightenment burned down, rebuilt, forgotten, and rediscovered by a kid on TikTok. And still, you remain. Not because you were perfect. You weren't. You compromised. You ruled with a steady hand and a selective ear. You cracked down when it suited you. You told peasants they were part of a grand vision while chaining them to land they'd never leave. You adored the Enlightenment, but only when it stayed in its lane. You were human, messy, brilliant, flawed. But that's why you matter. Because the people who changed the world weren't gods. They were stubborn, hopeful, complicated people with insomnia and ambition, and the ability to see past their own generation. And you, Catherine, were one of them. Maybe the best of them. And whether you're painted in oils or dragged across the internet by half-informed cynics, you still do what you always did best. You stay in the conversation, you refuse to be dismissed, and even now, in the hum of a digital age, you're still there. Quill in hand, brow raised, ready to speak. Now we're stepping into territory you couldn't have imagined, not even in your most ambitious candlelit dreams. Satellites orbit above what used to be your empire. The vast steppes are wired with fibre optics. The Black Sea, once your battleground, now carries cruise ships and political tension in equal measure. And still Catherine, your name appears in the headlines, in classrooms, in think pieces with titles like What Catherine the Great Would Say About Modern Russia. Spoiler, you'd probably sigh, pour a drink, and write a 20-page essay on governance by breakfast. We've arrived in the 21st century now, the age of instant everything. Empires are gone, replaced by global networks. Monarchs are figureheads. And the Enlightenment. It's been through so many reinterpretations it's more concept than compass. But you, somehow, survive the churn. Let's look at your newest incarnation. Pop culture icon. You're no longer confined to textbooks and dusty oil portraits. No, Now you're a streaming service darling, a clickbait favourite, a character in 100 shows, each of which feels the need to reimagine you, usually with cleavage and snark turned up to 11. You're played by Oscar winners, indie darlings, and, at least once, an animated squirrel in a parody skit. Is any of it accurate? Absolutely not. But oddly enough, none of it feels like an insult, because even the campiest version of you still radiates something potent. Power. Fringe. Fact. The 2020s saw a resurgence of interest in your love life thanks to a Catherine the Great aesthetic trend on social media. Silk gowns, handwritten letters, peacock motifs and quotes, half real, half hilariously fake, were suddenly everywhere. Teenagers were posting, "She slayed and stayed ruling" under your portrait. You weren't being studied, you were being claimed. But beyond the memes and miniseries, there's a deeper conversation. Historians, real ones, in cardigans with footnotes, keep returning to your policies, your reforms, your contradictions. New biographies come out every few years, each claiming to have uncovered the real Catherine, as if you've been hiding in the footnotes, just waiting for someone clever enough to unmask you. They analyse your letters again, using software to track changes in tone. They study your laws in light of modern human rights discourse. They place you beside world leaders, comparing your strategies with post-colonial theory, gender politics, and theories of soft power. And you still break their models. Because here's the thing, you're never quite what anyone wants you to be. Modern feminists celebrate your refusal to be sidelined, your unapologetic ambition, your command over a male-dominated world. But they also stumble over your reinforcement of serfdom, your pragmatic cruelty, your elitism. Progressives admire your thirst for education and legal reform, then flinch at your censorship and surveillance policies. Conservatives point to your respect for tradition, until they remember how you rewrote everything in your path. You do not bend easily into categories. You never did. That was the whole point. Let's rewind just slightly to one of the most interesting developments of your afterlife, the growing interest in your intellectual legacy. Turns out, your role as a philosopher empress wasn't just a PR stunt. Universities now teach entire courses around the nakaz, comparing it to Enlightenment-era constitutions and early feminist philosophy. Scholars examine how your work both echoed and challenged Rousseau. Some even argue that your rejection of a social contract was a deliberate response to Western naivete about governance. Fringe academic drama alert. In a recent conference at Cambridge, a scholar presented a paper arguing that your actual ideological soulmate wasn't Voltaire but Machiavelli. The room erupted in polite chaos. Someone dropped a cappuccino. You'd have adored it. And yet, for all the panels and podcasts, you remain stubbornly yourself, elegant and ruthless, curious and cunning, a monarch who read deeply but also ruled absolutely. And the farther we get from your lifetime, the more your contradictions feel relatable rather than confusing. The world is messier now. Our leaders, our politics, our philosophies, they're all layered with complexity and compromise. You, in retrospect, feel less like an outlier and more like a mirror. Let's get personal for a moment. There's a strange kind of intimacy in how people today still read your letters. You didn't just write about treaties and taxes, you wrote about loneliness, about beauty, about insomnia, about the pressure to always appear wise and decisive even when you weren't. You wrote like a person trying to hold up an empire with one hand and her own self-worth with the other. You wrote like you were still becoming. And that vulnerability, that's what brings you into the present. Because if we strip away the powdered wigs and the military parades and the heavy gowns lined with ermine, what's left is something recognisable. A woman who wasn't supposed to have power took it anyway and kept it. A leader constantly pulled between idealism and survival. Someone who could quote Plato at breakfast and negotiate a land grab by lunch. Someone who had to prove herself every day, to everyone, while the world waited for her to slip. You never did. Not really. Even now the debate rages. Was Catherine the Great a tyrant or a reformer? A champion of progress or a gilded autocrat? A feminist icon or a cautionary tale? And the answer, of course, is yes. Because greatness doesn't come clean. It comes tangled in contradictions. It comes from daring to lead when the world expects you to follow, from taking up space that was never meant for you and making it yours. Fringe footnote. In 2023, a startup trying to create AI-generated historical advisors released a Catherine the Great chatbot. It immediately went viral for being sassy, deeply opinionated, and incredibly accurate on issues of statecraft. Within weeks, it had 200,000 users and a fan base of middle-aged lawyers who claimed Catherine Bot helped them negotiate contracts more assertively. You're trending. Again. So here we are, 300 years after your birth, and your name is still a force, not because you were flawless, but because you were impossible to ignore. And as long as the world wrestles with ambition, leadership, and what it means to hold power as a woman, it will keep coming back to you, not as a footnote, as a challenge. Somewhere beneath layers of time and marble, the girl you used to be still lingers. The awkward teenager from Zerbst, who rode into Russia with a French accent, borrowed confidence, and a name that didn't even belong to her yet. You didn't know what you were stepping into. You didn't know the man you'd marry would be a disaster in human form, that you'd outlive almost every one of your allies, or that you'd someday stare down the French Revolution with a sharp quill and an army on standby. All you knew was that you didn't intend to be small, and you weren't. You took that raw, uncertain beginning, and you stretched it into an empire, an era, and a legacy that just refuses to sit still. Even now, your life reads like a novel no one has quite finished. Every generation tries to write its own ending for you, but you, being you, never. Stay on the page where they leave you. You keep walking, keep speaking, keep bending history back toward you like a candle drawn to breath. There's something else happening now, something you probably couldn't have anticipated. People are starting to feel protective of you. Not the courts or scholars or heads of state, but regular people, strangers, readers, women sitting in small apartments with books in their laps, teens watching miniseries late at night, artists painting your face on sneakers or tattooing your quotes on their ribs. They aren't just studying you, they're rooting for you, defending you, finding pieces of themselves in your contradictions. It's not just admiration, it's reclamation. You've become more than a historical figure. You're a narrative, a blueprint, a battle cry, a comfort. And in the world they live in, a world where women still get questioned for wanting too much, where leadership is still coded male, where ambition still needs a PR team, your story cuts deep. Because you weren't handed your power, you took it. Not with a sword, but with patience, intelligence, and an exhausting amount of paperwork. Fringe detail. In 2026, a university in Canada launches a course titled The Strategic Self, Lessons from Catherine the Great. It includes modules on leadership, decision-making under pressure, and yes, managing public image. It fills up in less than a day, with a waitlist that stretches across disciplines. You, Empress, have officially become career advice. But let's not pretend it's all reverence. Your legacy still ruffles feathers. Some critics argue you're over-glorified, that your reforms were surface level, your Enlightenment ideals more costume than core. They accuse you of hypocrisy, of hiding behind philosophy while keeping millions in chains, and they're not wrong to ask. You did expand serfdom even as you penned essays about equality. You did crush dissent with elegance and precision. You weren't soft, you weren't saintly. But perhaps that's the point. You were never pretending to be perfect. You were pretending to survive. In a court full of daggers and expectations and foreign advisors who waited for you to fail. And in that survival, you didn't just preserve yourself. You built something enormous, something still standing. In Russia today, your legacy is tangled with politics, as always. Some see you as the Golden Age incarnate, a reminder of imperial greatness. Others see you as an outdated symbol, irrelevant to the challenges of a modern state. Your statues are dusted off during election seasons, your quotes pulled out for patriotic montages. And somewhere, in the Hermitage, a tour guide tells your story again, dramatically, probably with a wink, and someone in the back thinks, she sounds like someone I could have followed. Fringe footnote, in a recent poll, Russians were asked which past leader they would most trust to handle current foreign policy. You ranked third behind Peter the Great and, bafflingly, a fictional Soviet general from a 1970s war film. But considering you're the only woman on the list, and you've been dead for over 2 centuries, that's a win in itself. And the Hermitage, oh, the Hermitage, it's still yours, you know, not legally, not technically, but spiritually, undeniably, eternally. Tourists wander through the galleries where your feet once echoed. They stand in front of the same canvases you had shipped across continents, gaze up at the ceilings you had painted for no one but yourself. And even when they don't know your name, or think you're the one who married Rasputin, yes, that still happens, they feel something. That atmosphere, that curation, that very specific, undeniable taste. Yours. It's strange, isn't it? The way things you touched still shape people you never met. The way decisions you made ripple forward. Like how your push for education led to a literate population that would later organise, protest, revolutionise. Or how your modernisation of the army made it possible for your heirs to fight Napoleon. Or how your cultural investments ensured that Russian art would someday sit beside the greats, not as imitation, but as peer. Even your mistakes had momentum, and yet you still feel elusive, like a reflection in palace glass, just out of reach, just hard enough to define that no one ever really gets you right. Every generation carves a new sculpture of you, and every time the face looks a little different. You'd probably find that hilarious, and maybe a little satisfying. Fringe detail: in 2028, during a bizarre cultural diplomacy exchange, a Russian delegation gifts a 3D printed bust of you to a foreign leader. It's embedded with a chip that plays your most famous quotes in 10 languages. Unfortunately, one of the quotes is misattributed, leading to a minor diplomatic scandal when it turns out the line actually came from a French comedian in 1982. You're not even around and you're still causing trouble? And what about the women who come after you? Oh, they're watching, they're reading, they're writing their own chapters with your voice in their ears. Not all of them want to be you, but they all want to know how you did it, how you got in, stayed in, thrived, outlasted. They quote you in boardrooms and blogs and campaign speeches and late-night texts. Some wear your portrait as jewellery. Others keep your name on their lips like a secret mantra for when things feel impossible. Because if a girl from nowhere can become an empress of everything, maybe they can too. And you? You're still walking through history, quietly, watching, not quite resting. It's strange how memory behaves, especially over centuries. You'd think it would fade, unravel, sink into some soft historical fog, but yours doesn't. Yours adapts, shifts shape. You're not a statue gathering moss. You're a living archive, rewiring yourself for each new generation. When the world grows weary of kings, you become a woman of letters. When it wants strength, you're the steel-spined general with a fleet in the Black Sea. When it wants glamour, you're the queen draped in ermine and gossip, ruling her lovers like chess pieces. And when it wants justice, you're back at your desk, scribbling Enlightenment ideals under candlelight, trying, really trying, to imagine a country better than the one you inherited. And now, with the world more connected than ever, satellites above, screens in every hand, voices flying across continents in under a second, your legacy is being tested in a way it never has before. Not by coups or revolutions, but by translation. You're no longer just Catherine the Great in a Russian history book. You're a Google search, a streaming option, a hashtag. Your story, so carefully curated in your lifetime, is now in everyone's hands to be remixed, reinterpreted, memed, debated. And weirdly, it suits you. Because you always had a thing for spectacle. Today, there's a Catherine for every audience. The scholars get their empress of law and governance, the woman who rebuilt provinces and codified administrative functions like it was a competitive sport. The romantics get their brilliant seductress with ink-stained fingers and impossibly high cheekbones. The feminists claim you as one of the first women to not only seize power but hold it, shape it, command it without apology. And the critics? Oh, they have their field day with you. The expansionist, the autocrat, the censor, the woman who promised progress but built an empire on the backs of those who couldn't speak for themselves. And they're all right. Because your life was never a single story, it was a contradiction wrapped in velvet, rolled across the steps and crowned with gold. You were everything they said, and none of it, quite. Fringe detail: in 2030, a Berlin-based theatre troupe stages an experimental production called Catherine X, a sci-fi retelling of your life in which you're an AI governing a post-human society through bureaucratic poetry and seduction algorithms. The show receives mixed reviews, mostly due to a 12-minute interpretive dance featuring robotic horses. You'd have laughed. Then written a scathing editorial about it under a pseudonym. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, your legacy becomes increasingly strategic. You're used as a kind of mirror, angled differently depending on what the state wants to see. If they need strength, they invoke your military reforms. If they need national pride, they mention your expansion. If they want cultural cachet, they point to the Hermitage and your court full of thinkers. But your Enlightenment leanings? Your obsession with European liberalism? Those parts get a bit quieter in the official retellings. They still sting a little too much. Still, your image is everywhere. Statues polished, museums restored, your face printed on. Commemorative coins projected onto buildings during national holidays, even recreated in augmented reality apps for tourists. The irony, of course, is that during your life you were obsessed with controlling your legacy. And now that it's fully out of your hands, it's flourishing in ways you couldn't have dreamed. That German princess from nowhere, Sophia, remember her? She's now a symbol etched into international imagination. Not just as a ruler of Russia, but as a woman who ruled. Full stop. With no asterisk, no apology, no waiting to be handed the crown. You took it, and kept it warm for over 3 decades. You're studied now in classrooms not just for what you governed, but how. Your diplomatic strategies, delicate but firm. Your legal reforms, sometimes slow, sometimes ruthless, always calculated. Your writing, sharp, persuasive, and surprisingly modern. Students dissect your correspondence with Voltaire the way others study war plans. Your public image is examined alongside contemporary branding experts. You're not a relic, you're a case study. Fringe footnote, there's even a leadership book titled What Would Catherine Do? Published in 2032, written by a self-styled corporate philosopher who pulls quotes from your letters and spins them into advice for navigating office politics. Chapter titles include Never Apologise for Vision, Fire the Fool, Promote the Planner, and Flirt with Diplomacy. It makes the bestseller list. You become boardroom material. But let's not float too far from who you really were. The woman who ruled from within her contradictions, not despite them. That tension between reason and rule, between empire and idealism, between power and partnership. You were, in many ways, the last monarch who truly believed in the Enlightenment as a usable tool, not just a fashionable theory. You read philosophers not to impress your courtiers, but to govern, to test ideas against the weight of real responsibility. You were trying to build something that could last longer than you. And here's the quiet miracle. You did. There are still laws in effect today that trace their ancestry to your decrees. There are still cities whose layouts follow your plans, still administrative regions marked by the divisions you drew, still universities that grew from the seeds you planted, still art, thousands of works, collected under your gaze, curated by your will, now admired by people who may not even know your name, but walk through your halls anyway, feeling something ancient and articulate in the air. And yet your legacy isn't made of architecture or paper, it's made of resistance. Of having been told, again and again, that you weren't enough. Not Russian enough. Not male enough. Not royal enough. And answering over and over with action, with policy, with presence. You didn't throw tantrums. You rewrote the rules. Quietly, persistently, with just enough velvet to distract your enemies, while you rearranged the pieces behind their backs. Fringe note. In an archive digitization project, one of your lesser-known letters is translated and goes mildly viral. It reads, "If they cannot see your worth, write laws so they have no choice." It's debated whether you actually wrote it, but no one really cares. It sounds like you, and that's enough. So where does that leave us? With an empire long gone, a palace now a museum, a crown behind glass. But the woman? The woman still walks, in lectures, in novels, in streaming scripts and graduation speeches, in rooms where someone needs to remember that intelligence and ambition are not crimes. That contradiction doesn't mean weakness, that greatness can be complicated and should be. And through all of it you remain, just out of reach, still moving, still guiding, still a force. You're not done yet. You've lasted longer than your empire, longer than the palaces you built, the enemies you outplayed, the lovers you dismissed with a smile. You, Catherine, have become an idea. A durable, flexible, maddeningly alive idea that won't sit still on any shelf. Your body may have gone cold centuries ago, but your legacy, still warm, still whispering, still shaping the way people think about power, possibility, and the sheer nerve it takes to step into history and claim your own name. Let's take a final walk through your world, the one you left behind and the one you continue to haunt. Russia today is not the one you ruled. The empire is gone, fragmented into borders you couldn't have drawn in your most ambitious expansions. The Tsars are long buried, their bones now catalogued instead of crowned. The Soviet experiment came and went, collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. And yet, your imprint remains. It's not just in the Hermitage or the Nakars or the dozens of cities you once designed on parchment. It's in the very rhythm of the country. The idea that governance, for all its brutality, can also be art. You were, perhaps, the only ruler who governed like a novelist, weaving plot lines, building characters, creating foils and rewriting the ending when it didn't satisfy. You weren't content to simply keep the wheels turning. You wanted to author the empire. That's what makes you different. Not just powerful, but intentional. Every policy, every appointment, every carefully posed portrait was part of a larger narrative. The enlightened autocrat, the mother of the nation, the philosopher empress, the patron of the arts, the woman who dared. But even the best authors leave behind unfinished chapters. Your civil code never got completed. The reforms you began, on serfdom, on press freedom, on education, were left open-ended, adopted in fragments or stalled entirely. Your grandson tried to follow your path and nearly broke under the weight of your shadow. Your successors, for all their crowns and titles, couldn't match your pace. And so, some of your dreams faded. Others were buried on purpose. A few were stolen, rebranded, and passed off as someone else's. Yet history keeps circling back to you. Every time a woman steps into power, your name slips into the conversation. Every time a nation struggles between authoritarianism and idealism, someone mentions the Nakas and says, she tried to do both. And every time a museum opens a new wing, hung with canvases once purchased by your hand, someone stops in front of a painting and wonders what it must have felt like to walk these halls as their owner, not their guest. Fringe fact: in 2035, a novelist publishes a speculative fiction book where you never die in 1796. Instead, you live another 20 years, reshape the entire Napoleonic conflict, and mentor both Alexander and his rival generals. The book becomes a cult classic, especially among political science students. The final line: she was never history, she was prophecy. You'd have snorted at the melodrama, then kept the quote anyway. Let's be honest, you never wanted to be immortal in bronze. You wanted to be understood, not as a symbol, but as a woman who fought tooth and nail for every inch of respect she earned. You didn't hide your ambition, you polished it. You didn't downplay your intelligence, you weaponized it. And when the world tried to reduce you to rumours and ridicule, you simply kept building, kept writing, kept ruling. And now you are remembered not just for your crown, but for your craft. Because ruling wasn't something you inherited. It was something you learned. Through observation, through error, through ruthless practice. You understood that power wasn't static. It had to be updated, maintained, rewritten. That's why your story still feels so modern. You governed like someone managing an unstable system, adjusting, editing, testing the limits without breaking the whole thing. You didn't cling to tradition for its own sake. You asked, does this still work? And if it didn't, you changed it. You lived your life like a conversation with the future, and the future keeps replying. Even now your face appears where you'd least expect it, on feminist merchandise, in philosophical debates, in startup pitch decks quoting your views on vision and execution. Historians revise your image every few years, but no version seems to stick for long. You remain elusive, like a ghost that edits its own Wikipedia page. Fringe side note, your personal library, what survives of it, is still being catalogued. In 2037, a team of researchers discovers marginalia in one of your volumes of Plutarch that simply reads, "He has the heart of a coward, but the voice of a god." No one knows who you were referring to. Theories range from Potemkin to Peter. Or maybe it was just your daily critique of foreign ambassadors. You never gave away your full self, did you? For all the letters, the manifestos, the court gossip, You stayed hidden in plain sight. Even your most intimate writings seem crafted with legacy in mind. Not dishonest, just intentional. You knew you were being read, judged, measured, and so you turned every diary entry into a staging ground. Even your vulnerability was choreographed. Not to deceive, but to own the narrative. You lived knowing that history would one day quote you, and you made damn sure you sounded good when it did. And what remains above all is this: you mattered. Not just as a ruler, but as a reminder. That leadership can be graceful and brutal. That intelligence can be wielded like a sword. That power, when held by someone underestimated, becomes something altogether new. You were not perfect, not even close, but you were great, in every sense of the word. And that greatness wasn't in your titles or territory. It was in your defiance of limitation, your refusal to stay in the lane carved out for you, your ability to hold contradiction without collapse. You were the empress, the intellect, the architect, the flame. And tonight, as the lights dim and the world grows quiet for just a moment, maybe someone will remember you. Not the gossip, not the legend, but the woman with the quill, drafting her empire by hand, line by careful line. She was tired, but not done, not ever. And now, here you are, your story gently set down, the echo of your footsteps still lingering in corridors no one walks at night. You've been more than just a name in a history book, haven't you? Tonight, you are a girl with frozen toes on a carriage ride to nowhere, a wife plotting her way out of a useless marriage, an empress with a quill sharp enough to cut policy into permanence. You were the orchestrator of empire, the patron of elegance, the survivor of every man who thought you'd fade quietly into the background. But instead of vanishing, you expanded. Not just borders, but ideas, culture, thought, the very definition of what power could look like when wielded with both ambition and intention. And now, centuries later, you're still doing it, quietly rewriting your own myth, lingering like candle smoke in the minds of those who need a reminder that greatness isn't always loud, or clean, or even fair. Sometimes it's just persistent. Sometimes it's about showing up, writing laws by hand, and refusing to apologize for being smarter than the men in the room. So rest now, Empress. You've earned that much. The empire sleeps, the documents are filed, the portraits remain, and somewhere, in a library or a living room, someone's just discovered you for the first time, and they're wondering how a woman like you ever existed. Don't worry, they'll find out. Now close your eyes, let the page turn. The world's still here, and your story's not going anywhere.